Updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees on the web at aidenmarkets.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeats.com.
For the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from a book written by my old friend, Dennis Weaver. He has passed away. I wrote the foreword to this book, just FYI. It's called All the World's a Stage, and it's Dennis's autobiography. Dennis Weaver, Chester and Gunsmoke, you know, all that kind of stuff. He's talking about early in the Depression. This is from page 17. It's just kind of telling his early life. Early in the Depression, it became clear that people had to... He's talking about the 1930s, right? When he was a young boy. Early in the Depression, it became clear that people had to come together and support each other, or many would just not survive. Not being cooperative and neighborly was not an option. If our neighbors were in trouble, we would not think twice about helping them. We just did it. I remember a family named Hardy bought the 10 acres next to our farm. There was nothing on that land except woods. The men in the surrounding area got together on weekends to cut down the trees and made logs to build a house, a real log raising. Within 6 or 7 weekends, they built a log home for the Hardy family to live in and a shed for their cows. Children had lots of fun. We played games and jumped from stump to stump like leaping frogs while the men sawed logs and hammered nails. Ladies brought covered dishes of food like potato salad, baked beans, and Jell-O, and we had a picnic at lunchtime. It was a community thing, a gathering of friends, and to this day, I still carry the feeling with me. In those times and moments, despite the Depression, we thought we had the best of life, and in a way we really did. Life was simpler. We knew how good it felt to be neighborly, to share our lives with each other. The national economy was shredded due to the crash of 1929, but in our area, including parts of Missouri, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas, the problem was exacerbated by what was known as the Great Dust Bowl. Continuing droughts had dried up the earth, and the fierce winds picked up the defenseless soil and made huge clouds of thick, swirling dust. Visibility often shrunk to a few yards. Most skilled and determined farmers were humbled before its wrath. The nutritious topsoil was all blown away, and agriculture came to a screeching halt. At the time, I didn't understand it, but it's crystal clear to me now that our economy and our environment are interdependent. When the environment at that time was destroyed and the farmers could no longer farm, they weren't the only ones who suffered. The economic disaster for the farmers spread like a raging virus to carpenters, plumbers, shop owners, and even bankers. Okies by the thousand piled whatever possessions they could salvage into cars, trucks, any jalopy that would run, and headed for California, which Dust Bowl victims considered to be the land of milk and honey. Perhaps the only one who profited from the Dust Bowl was John Steinbeck when he wrote The Grapes of Wrath. Because of the Dust Bowl, our farm was not financially successful. It certainly helped to feed the family, but the extra income my folks had hoped it would generate did not materialize. Mom, always trying to find a way out, heard from neighbors who had fled the Dust Bowl and our devastated economy earlier that the strawberry picking was good in Oregon. There was money to be made just for the picking. So we gave up on the farm and moved back to my birthplace in Joplin, 619 Brownell, to get ready for the trek west. Furthest west I'd ever been was Blackwell, Oklahoma. Would I see a real live cowboy? I wondered. What would Oregon be like? I might even see the Pacific Ocean. Our budget for the trip was minimal at best. Like the pioneers who crossed the Great Plains 100 years earlier, we were obliged to carry our own supplies because motels and restaurants were out of the question. Unlike those earlier settlers, the horses that carried us were not hitched to a wagon, but were under the hood of a 1928 DeSoto. Our plan was simple. Mom, Howard, Mary Ann, 2 years old by this time, Jerry, Denzel, Bell, and I would go to Oregon and pick strawberries and do what other jobs we could get. We would save our earnings and come back to Joplin in time for Howard and me to go back to school. Dad would stay behind, keep his job at the Empire District, and serve as a safety net for us. In case we broke down or got stranded, he could bail us out. Denzel was a carpenter by trade. He put his skills to good use. He built a cupboard on the back of Old Betsy, our DeSoto, where we could store an ample supply of canned goods and food staples. By releasing a fastener, the backside of the cupboard opened up and a leg swung down to support it, and lo and behold, we had a table on which to prepare the food and off of which we could eat. We jammed the storeroom with supplies, gave old Betsy a final mechanical check, said our farewells, and headed west for the wild blue yonder. Although she never hinted at it, I'm sure Mom must have had a few qualms and trepidations. For me, it was the beginning, just the beginning of what I imagined to be a great adventure. We started out for Oregon in the late spring of 1934. In those days, there were no 4-lane interstates, just 2-lane roads that were often in need of repair and full of detours. Our top speed was 40 miles an hour, so driving to Oregon was no walk in the park. Not long after crossing into Colorado from Kansas, we could see on the horizon what looked like a triangular cloud. It was strange because, like the other clouds moved, this one didn't budge. We used it as a guiding star for more than 2 hours before we realized it wasn't a cloud at all. It was the snow-capped top of Pikes Peak. As we drove deeper and deeper into the Rocky Mountains, I was moved more and more by their sheer beauty and breathtaking grandeur. It was awesome. I loved the majestic granite mountains, the tall pines, the quaking aspens, the crisp, dry air. It was all very magical to me. I guess I'm back in Colorado today because I was so impressed with it as a child. I was not only impressed by the beauty, but by what it had to offer. This was the first time I'd ever seen a real live working cowboy, and it was the first time I'd ever seen a real deer. We were driving over Wolf Creek Pass at dusk, coming around a bend, and there, right in front of us, was this wild deer running down the road in and out of the shadows. Book All the World's a Stage, Dennis Weaver's autobiography. The foreword by Thom Hartmann.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's going to be an interesting day. Rick Wartzman and Don Siegelman are going to join us later on in the program. I wanted to start, there's a bunch of stuff in the news, but it all kind of echoes around this same theme, and that theme arguably is Donald Trump up to the presidency? I mean, as a country, I was going to say setting aside party, but I don't think that Republicans or Democrats, frankly, are going to be willing to do that. But is Donald Trump so temperamentally unfit to be president that there should be some sort of a campaign to encourage Mike Pence and his cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment? Or will this simply take care of itself with the impeachment hearings? It's increasingly looking like, at the very least, the Trump organization, with all these, or Paul Manafort, or both, with all of these Trump properties that were bought for millions and millions of dollars with cash. That's very often, not always, and not necessarily in this case, but very often the sign of a money laundering operation. And, real estate deals have gotten, basically as a result of lobbying here in Washington, D.C., giving money to members of Congress, real estate developers like Donald Trump not only enjoy mind-boggling tax benefits, 20 years without paying anything except the minimum income tax, or the alternative minimum tax, the ATM, or AMT. But in addition to that, there's all these, like if you put $10 million into a bank account, you would have to disclose it to the IRS. If you put $10 million into a piece of property, you don't. And the developer doesn't have to. And that's, or at least that's my understanding of the law. And, this is something that has worked tremendously to his benefit. So, if it turns out the Trump organization has been engaged in money laundering or something else, collusion with Russia to flip an election, whatever it may be. It's all these things are, being investigated. And what could come out of, God only knows. But whether it's the impeachment process or whether it's the 25th Amendment, I don't know of any other mechanism to to remove him from office. But I think the entire world is starting to look at us and go, you know, your president is making us nervous. Your president is making us less safe. Your president, they are saying to us, is a fool and making America a laughingstock on the world stage. Do something, they're saying. So what do we do? I mean, you know, do we stop? You can't call the cat. You know, you can call Congress 202-224-3121 and say, hey, it's time to impeach Trump. But he hasn't. I mean, the impeachment. Yes, the impeachment process is a political process, but there has to be some legal basis to it. In the Constitution, it requires high crimes or misdemeanors. You can't just impeach somebody because you think they're stupid, or they have a short attention span, or they require 2 briefings a day where all of the briefing papers are pictures of them, you know, with smiling faces and things. It's, you know, which is actually a thing, apparently. Trump gets these, you know, Obama used to get them every day. You know, it'd be a collection of newspaper reports about what's going on in the world. And the whole idea was to give him a profile, a cross-section. In fact, I recall back when Lamar and I were working on John Kennedy, on the book about the Kennedy assassination, Jack Kennedy used to get a daily briefing about what was in the newspapers. And it would be, you know, okay, here's the, you know, an attack on unions going on. And here, you know, the Soviet Union said so-and-so. And the Treasury Secretary thinks this and that. And here's what's happening in the market, you know, in the stock markets. And here's what's happening in the labor markets. And, you know, it'd just be a kind of a roundup of the day's news. Not classified, just also, you know, so the president has an understanding of what the American people are understanding. And I'm assuming it started long before Jack Kennedy. In fact, I'd be surprised if it didn't start with the FDR administration. FDR is a very media-savvy president. And so all the way from way back when until Barack Obama, the president once a day would get a folder filled with copies, or it used to be tear sheets during the Kennedy administration. They'd actually just tear the pages out of the newspaper. And here would be, you know, copiers were much more expensive to make. It was much more difficult and expensive to make copies back then. But, you know, here are the stories of the day. But Trump has changed that to every day he has to have 2 folders delivered to him, at least according to the news reports we're reading. And they have to be all about him. Pictures of, you know, literally screenshots from TV shows with his smiling face or a chyron, you know, the lower third, the words on the lower third of the screen that says something nice about him. It's all, you know, any articles, you know, Donald Trump is a genius, that kind of headline, that'll make it into his daily briefing, as it were. So people are looking at us going, this is wrong. Meanwhile, North Korea, you know, Donald Trump, his fire and fury thing, North Korea says, this is a load of nonsense. They know a bluff when they see one. They've been bluffing for what, 60 years? They understand bluff. The problem is the United States should never bluff. Teddy Roosevelt articulated this in 1900, you know, walk softly and carry a big stick. When the United States bluffs, it diminishes our credibility. It diminishes our power in the world. If you're going to take somebody out, take them out. But if you're not going to take them out, don't threaten to. It just makes you look weak. Very strange. And then on top of that, after threatening to take out North Korea, Donald Trump goes on to say, you know, my first order as president was to renovate and modernize our nuclear arsenal. It's now stronger and more powerful than ever before. No, actually, that was Obama. President Obama, you know, put forward the order to upgrade, and by upgrade, I mean modernize our nuclear forces. And Congress, you know, allocated billions of dollars to do this. To the best of my knowledge, Trump has done no executive orders or other orders to that effect. I think he's just claiming credit for something that Obama did. But as a consequence of these kind of fundamentally stupid statements that we now know, literally Trump pulled this out of his backside. He didn't consult with anybody. And he's surrounding himself with generals who actually understand how the world works, and he clearly doesn't. That, oh yeah, you know, we should have a preventative war. What did Sarah Sanders say? The words were his own. Right. The tone and strength of the message was discussed beforehand. Yes, we're going to say something firm. Well, you don't give Donald Trump generalities like, hey, be firm. Because he thinks be firm means, I'm going to threaten to burn your house down. No, be firm is, you know, don't do that or there will be consequences, and you will not like the consequences. So anyway, we've got that bizarre stuff going on in Cuba. American diplomats losing their hearing. Nobody knows why. The FBI raided Paul Manafort's home. This is now coming out. Turns out this is on July 26th. This was about 2 weeks ago. And this was a no-knock warrant. I mean, they kicked down the door. Pretty amazing. Documents are said to include notes Manafort took while attending a meeting with Don Trump Jr. and a Russian lawyer at Trump Tower in June of 2016. You know, quack, quack, quack. So, and there's a 36-foot inflatable chicken outside the White House. Did you see this yesterday? This chicken has been following Donald Trump around, you know, at events saying, are you chicken to show us your tax returns? Why are you chicken to turn, you know, it's a chicken with Trump hair. It's pretty amazing. You haven't seen this. And now Donald Trump is getting into a war with Mitch McConnell, a guy that he's going to need if there's an impeachment trial. Not a good idea. Not a good idea. So what do we do about this?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. Impeachment,
25th Amendment. Is there something I'm missing? You know, obviously I don't want anything violent or inappropriate, but you know, what other mechanisms do we have? And welcome back. Gary in Skellytown, Texas. Hey, Gary, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Hello, Tom. How you doing today?
Great. What's up?
I was thinking, I think I'm pretty sure it happened 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago that, you know, we got in this nuclear thing with North Korea about their nuclear energy, and North Korea told the United States that if we would quit doing all their war games off their shores, that they would get rid of all their nuclear stuff.
Yeah, that was 1994. It was a deal they made with Bill Clinton, and it wasn't just the war games. We also gave them $4 billion and allowed them to have nuclear reactors to generate electricity. And it looked like they had frozen their nuclear program. And by and large, they had. However, when George W. Bush came into office, he asserted that while they were in apparent compliance with the agreement, they were actually they were processing fuel in a way that was concentrating it in the direction of bomb making, which they were not allowed to do. And of course, this all came after Bush called them the axis of evil, which just blew up the whole deal. But anyhow, if that's what you're talking about, Gary, that's my recollection.
Yeah, I couldn't remember. I didn't know all the information about it, you know, I guess they said, yeah, if y'all quit doing the war games off our shore, that.
Right, and they agreed to allow IAEA inspectors into North Korea, and they put cameras all around the nuclear facilities that were continuously monitored. I mean, it was certainly not foolproof.
Did they just kick all the inspectors out, or?
After Bush called them the axis of evil, yeah.
Oh, I see.
All three countries did. I mean, you know, when the President of the United States, in his State of the Union address, calls you one of 3 evil countries in the world, and then starts speaking about one of those 3 countries as being in the crosshairs of regime change, if I was the leader of one of the other 2 countries, I'd be saying, I need to get me some nukes quick. Wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah.
So that's, I mean, it's just a predictable consequence. Once again, our foreign policy is screwed up because of the stupidity of George W. Bush. I
don't understand some of the thinking some of them people think up there sometimes. It's like really, really.
Yeah. Well, I think that they're thinking in simplistic terms in a very complex world, and this is particularly problematic with Bush. With Trump. It was a problem with Bush because Bush did not have a deep grasp of issues, and frankly didn't much care. He was a C student, shall we say, and but he did sit down for the CIA briefings. I mean, even to the point where when he ignored their warnings that 9/11 was coming for almost a month. On August 5th, the CIA actually chartered a plane and flew a guy down to Crawford, Texas, to personally make sure that George W. Bush read the briefing that said bin Laden determined to strike inside the U.S. and there's predicting 9/11. And he apparently took it to heart. His vacation was supposed to be over at the end of August, but he was afraid to go back to Washington, D.C., so instead he went to Florida, where his brother put the entire state on emergency lockdown for 11 days until 9/11 happened. And then after, about a week after that, Bush was willing to go back to Washington, D.C. But, so much of this stuff, if his father, Daddy Bush, had not, for political capital, done the first Gulf War in Iraq, none of this would be happening. I mean, you could take it all the way back to Republicans wanting little wars.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Looking at all this stuff in the bigger view, the Middle East would not, and I think it's important for us every now and then to just step back and look at least, the last 5-6 decades and say, what have we done that we can learn from? What have we done smart? What have we done stupid that we can learn from? And we know that in 1979, I believe it was, Maggie Thatcher was wildly unpopular. Actually, I'm not sure of the year of the Falkland War, but I should drop into our chat room. Sue probably knows it right off the top of her head. But in any case, back in the day, Maggie Thatcher was insanely unpopular. She was busting the unions. She was 1982. Thank you, Troy. She was doing all this stuff. And, the Argentinians, one story of history is that they started it, and others that the British started it, whoever started it. Maggie Thatcher decided to have a little war over the Falkland Islands. The little war just lasted a little while, and the British won. Yeah, April 2nd, 1982. Thank you, Sue. And that little war was, incredible for her popularity. It really helped out. And, prior to that, up until that point, the conventional wisdom was don't go starting any wars, right? Lyndon Johnson tried that in Vietnam. It did not work out well. Don't do it again. That was kind of worldwide conventional wisdom, or at least in the Western world. And then Maggie Thatcher had her little war in Argentina, and it was like, oh, wow. That worked. Double bonus, the Argentinians started it, right? So Maggie Thatcher really looked like a hero, right? You're not going to step on us. And so Reagan looked at that and said, oh, wow, this is cool. And he said, let's take out Grenada, right? It's a socialist country. We don't want those thinking socialists in the Western Hemisphere, and we're not, we can't go to war with Cuba, but Grenada, hey, Maurice Bishop is running the country. He's an avowed socialist. Let's do it. And so we attacked Grenada. Now, weirdly enough, Grenada was one of 3 nations in the world that North Korea had, mutual agreements with, mostly technology transfer stuff. But they were doing business together, North Korea and Grenada. Hey, communists stick together. So when Reagan attacked Grenada, that was the point at which North Korea started getting really nervous. My God, if he could take out Grenada, he could take out us. And so they started planning for, they'd already been planning. They didn't start getting nervous then. They'd fought a war against us that just leveled Pyongyang, the capital city of North Korea. There was literally one building left standing. Millions of people died in that war. It was a horrific war. So Reagan has his little war in Grenada, and Bush Sr. goes, hey, that's kind of cool. You got popular as a result of that. And so did Maggie Thatcher. I guess, the post-Vietnam rules have changed. So I'm going to have a little war with Saddam Hussein. And so, he had his person, April Gillespie, tell Saddam Hussein, yeah, if you want to take Kuwait, that's fine, no problem. And then as soon as Saddam Hussein took Kuwait, because they were slant drilling into his oil wells and stealing his oil, as soon as he took Kuwait, boom, we invaded and, kicked his butt, threw him back to Baghdad. But the war only lasted a couple of days. It was a 100-hour war. So it didn't quite get Bush the popularity he needed to get reelected, but it gave him a 10, 20, 30-point boost in the I don't remember the exact number, but it was huge. Suddenly, George Herbert Walker Bush, everybody thought he was a wimp. Oh, no, he's a war president. So his son says, I got to have some wars, too. And if I'm going to have a war, it's going to be, and this is what he told his biographer, Mickey Herskowitz, back in 1999, before he ran for president. He said, if I'm going to have a war, it's going to last long enough that it's a real war. My daddy just wasted all that political capital. I'm not going to waste that political capital, and I'm going to use that political capital to privatize Social Security, which had been his lifelong dream ever since he ran for Congress in 1978. In Texas, unsuccessfully, he lost on the single issue of privatizing Social Security. It's the Republicans' dream. So, here's this little war doctrine. It doesn't work anymore. If George W. Bush had not tried to have his little war in Iraq, first in Afghanistan and then in Iraq, we would not have this mess all over the Middle East. And arguably, this all started, what got bin Laden started was Bush Sr., Daddy Bush, creating, for the very first time, a U.S. Air Force base in Saudi Arabia. That was the main complaint of bin Laden against us that led to 9/11. So Bush Sr.'s little war brought us 9/11. 9/11 gave Bush Jr. an opportunity for a couple of little wars. And now Donald Trump thinks he can have a little war with North Korea. Every single one of these Republican wars is getting more stupid.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So what do we do about this? Obviously, call your member of Congress, 202-224-3121. Stop this man from starting another war.
Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from the Thom Hartmann Reader, which is excerpts from other books that I've written. This excerpt is from Threshold. And it starts out, we're on page 239. It starts out with, I went to Corral, Peru. It's a town that, or the first mother city, the first original city that has ever been discovered intact. It's 5,000 years old. It has been buried for 4,000 years. It was just excavated in the last decade. I went down to Peru. We did our radio show from there. And I met with Dr. Ruth Shady, who is the anthropologist and archaeologist who's running this. And she said, well, as we sat and ate, I asked her what was the most significant fact about Corral. Here, she said, the civilization was different, contrasting the Corral of 5,000 years ago with the city-states that were emerging in Egypt, India, and Asia at that time. The focus of the culture here was different. When this civilization was formed here, peace was very important. There was no war. She paused and looked at me with a glint in her eye. Why? Why was there no war? She asked as if quizzing me. It turns out they found this city that had been there for 1,000 years, and there wasn't a single instrument of war or violence anywhere in the city. Music, dancing, flutes, amphitheaters, no war. So then we jump to page 244. Are we innately evil or good, warlike or peaceful? In 1634, in his book Leviathan, Thomas Hobbes stated our culture's assumption of the essentially evil nature of humans, saying that life without the iron fist of church or state would be war of every man against every man, resulting in a society where life is poor, nasty, brutish, and short. A generation later, Jean-Jacques Rousseau and John Locke challenged Hobbes, suggesting that evidence from tribes being discovered across Africa and the Americas by European explorers demonstrated that instead, the natural state of humankind was good, egalitarian, and peaceful. The thinking of Rousseau and Locke explicitly and overtly influenced the founders of the United States, particularly Thomas Jefferson, who saw verification in it in his own contact with Native Americans. Thus began America as an egalitarian experiment, an experiment that has been expanded and developed by nearly 100 other nations in the world that claim democracy, particularly the countries of Northern Europe, where once feared and warlike people, most notably the Vikings of Norway and Sweden, are now among the happiest and most peaceful and self-sufficient people in the world. Yet the Hobbeses of the world are currently ascendant in terms of both war on humans and war on the environment. But what should be done? As I said in Leonardo DiCaprio's environmental documentary, The 11th Hour, the problem is not a problem of technology. The problem is not a problem of too much carbon dioxide. The problem is not a problem of global warming. The problem is not a problem of waste. All of those things are symptoms of the problem. The problem is the way that we are thinking. The problem is fundamentally a cultural problem. It's at the level of our culture that this illness is happening. In my books, I've shared stories from all around the world of cultures that have matured, awakened, and found ways to live in peace, harmony, and ecological balance, and the fate of others that have not. Some are pre-city, Aboriginal and tribal people. Some are modern communities. Some are fully developed city-states moving quickly in the direction of peace. All offer us a new vision of how life can be in a world where the core assumptions of modern culture are challenged and modified. This is not a radical or new age or easily dismissed concept. It started with the Enlightenment of the 17th century. Its first experiment was the founding of the United States in the 18th century. Flawed, but a great experiment. It flowered throughout the world throughout the 19th century as nation after nation flipped from warrior king states to democracies. It found global acceptance in the 20th century with the foundation of the United Nations, the first international organization whose single explicit purpose was to create, promote, and maintain worldwide peace. And now in the 21st century, as war against both humans and against nature is increasingly being viewed with horror by people around the world, movements are springing up all over the planet to reject the immature cultural paradigms of the past and move us into a post-carbon, post-warfare, egalitarian, and peaceful world where there's room for both humans and for all other life. Then we start a chapter, why and when did war begin? If it's true, as scientists from Peter Farb to Rianne Eisler to Ruth Shady point out, that a prime differentiator between war societies and peaceful societies is the role of power relationships between men and women, the question is raised, why and when does war begin, and how is it related to the relationship between the sexes? Most pre-literate cultures, from those in the Arctic to those in the southernmost tips of South America and Africa, were largely peaceful before contact with technology and our culture. While there was conflict, and often violent conflict, it rarely reached the proportions of organized, sustained, legally sanctioned mass murder that we today refer to as war. As the anthropologist Peter Farb has documented, some Native American societies, for example, the Shoshone, didn't even have a word for war in their vocabulary. Others used organized games to resolve conflicts. Many theories have been put forward for how and why the warrior mentality took over. And then, it goes on to whether this started with animal husbandry or whether it started with agriculture, where did war begin, and some interesting stuff. So it's in the Thom Hartmann Reader.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights. All the important stories we cover and the issues we care about are at hartmanreport.com. Members of our community can comment and join the conversation. One last thing, just to put a punctuation point at the end of this rant. We don't have an ambassador to South Korea. The State Department is filled with unfilled posts. We don't have. This is the naked incompetence of the Trump administration, or I'm not even sure partisanship is the word, factionalism maybe, that Donald Trump doesn't want somebody serving in his administration unless they have basically, gone on national television and said that they want to kiss his butt and lay down in front of a bus in the middle of Pennsylvania Avenue and get run over just to help him out, right? I mean, you just have to show loyalty and fealty and blind love for this man, like Scaramucci. And that didn't even help Scaramucci from getting fired, right? It all happened within one Scaramucci, 10 days, bang, it's gone. So, you got to seriously suck up to this guy if you want a job in his administration, or at least a job that's going to last more than a few months. And, there's not a lot of diplomats who do that kind of thing. So he's doing what? Appointing Newt Gingrich's third wife to be the ambassador to the Vatican, which doesn't recognize marriage after the after the first marriage. His third wife. It's just bizarre. So anyhow, the net of all this is that the one thing that probably is our greatest hope for not engaging in World War III, for not stepping into a nuclear holocaust, the greatest hope is diplomacy. And Rex Tillerson wants to cut the budget of the State Department by between a quarter and a third. He's, all these senior positions that are not filled. It's like, the Republicans before Benghazi happened, voting down the State Department's request for increased security for facilities like Benghazi. The Republicans vote down the extra security, and then when something happens, they start screaming about it. Well, the Republicans could be, leading us into a nuclear war with North Korea, and there might not be any afterwards. Anyway, your thoughts on all this. Andy in Petaluma, California. Hey, Andy, what's on your mind?
Hey, yeah, so when Trump the traitor starts his distraction war, I think one simple thing we can all do is turn off the TV, because CNN and MSNBC, I feel, will immediately start banging the war drum. Not only will they do that, but they'll also start attacking anybody who speaks out against the war. So we shouldn't reward them with ratings. And also, that type of coverage could facilitate a second term for Trump, as I believe it sort of did with Bush.
I agree. I agree on all points. The one problem is, people slow down for fistfights and car wrecks. People will, if people see naked bodies, they look at them. There's a reason why advertising agencies put scantily clad women in ads. It draws the eye. And disaster porn, war porn is very compelling stuff. So, Andy, we can talk all day about don't watch the damn networks when they go on their war terror like they did in 2002 and 2003 with Afghanistan and Iraq. We can ask for that, but I don't think it's going to work. I mean, it's a start. It's a start, but yeah. Andy, thank you for the call. Kyle in Enid, Oklahoma. You have any suggestions?
Well, I had a different theory that has not been talked about.
Okay.
We all agree that Russia's a petrostate. Rex Tillerson obviously owns lots of Exxon stock.
Tillerson's a petro-oligarch, let's call him.
Yeah. And Donald Trump, I think most of us agree, is in debt to the Russians in some way, shape, or form. I think if we look at the three of them the three arguably most powerful men in the world have one thing in common. they want the price of oil to go up dramatically.
Right.
Rex Tillerson, I was a commodity broker for 17 years. Rex Tillerson is very adept at getting in and causing conflicts. Problems are in the Strait of Hormuz, getting oil to spike. They need one more shot up. And if they can,
and a war would do that.
This is why I think that Korea was a sideshow that he wasn't expecting and doesn't want. That's why I think they won't mess with him if they can help it unless we're attacked. They want to start a fight in the Strait of Hormuz, close it down, get a spike in the price of oil. Can you imagine the value to Putin if oil spiked $25 to $50 in a month?
Well, it wouldn't just be Putin. It would be Venezuela. It would be all the countries in the Middle East. It would be Russia. It would be the big oil companies. I mean, everybody who sells oil benefits from that. Are you, what are you thinking? Something like a terrorist incident happening in Malaysia or something?
No. Just think what he's already done. He was in Saudi Arabia.
Well, who's the he you're talking about? Trump?
Trump was in Saudi Arabia, bad-mouthing Iran, doing everything he could to what appeared to be start problems. He's wanting to arm Saudi Arabia further. Those three individuals have a massive thing in common, and that's the price of oil. Right. Putin would wipe out whatever Trump owed him instantly. If you could, a $40 jump or 30 or 25 jump would make Putin, who knows what, $1 trillion?
Well, we don't know, and what we do know about Trump and his debt is that most of it is to Deutsche Bank, the German bank. Although it makes perfect sense to me that he owes a bunch of money to a bunch of oligarchs, probably Russian oligarchs. But
just a theory.
I get it, and this is all speculation. But the net bottom line here, Kyle, of what you're suggesting is that war pretty much anywhere. A Korean war would be really, really bad. It wouldn't. The cost benefit ratio would not be worth it. But a smaller war someplace that would spike the price of oil.
Close the Strait of Hormuz. Do it. Just close
that arguably, the problem is China or North Korea is not getting their oil through water-based. They're not getting it through the Straits of Hormuz. Japan is. Well, they're getting their oil over the land from China. So
I'm saying forget Korea.
If you want to spike the price of oil, what you do is you provoke a war with Qatar. I would say, Saudi Arabia right now is, or at least a PAC that's funded by the Saudis, is running ads here in Washington, D.C., basically calling on the United States to sever ties with Qatar, calling Qatar a state-sponsored terrorism, et cetera. What I believe they're really upset about, and not just the Saudis, the Israelis are also getting in on this. And you got a right-wing government in Israel with Netanyahu. You've got a right-wing government in Saudi Arabia with King Salman. And I think that what they're both upset about is Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is telling what's going on in Gaza and the West Bank, and which is not making Israel happy. And they're telling what's going on in Yemen right now with this god-awful genocidal war that the Saudis are waging with U.S. weaponry, against the Houthis in Yemen. And so if they could take, Qatar doesn't have oil, but they've got natural gas, massive amounts of natural gas, and all these markets are interlinked. And so if they could take down Qatar somehow, the UAE is big on this. Now the UAE is like one of the major lobbyers right now in terms of dollars coming into the United States. I mean, there's a lot of ways that this could happen. Kyle, I don't discount anything you're saying. Thank you for the call. David in Miami Beach. Hey, David, what's up?
Yes, sir. North Miami Beach. Thanks for being on Progressive Voices.
My pleasure.
And, yes. So I think we're going about this the wrong way. We give him an out. He wants to take credit for the $1 trillion to fix the missiles. All he has to do is audit the Pentagon. Rumsfeld knew there was $1 trillion missing.
Yeah.
He wants to cut taxes on the rich. He could do that without hurting his actual voters by, say, cut the income tax to 35%, but corporations or people make sure they have to pay the 35% to match.
Right.
He could be Nixon, reaching across the spectrum. Give him a way out like any other criminal.
Well, I have a feeling Mike Pence is going to do that, and go to officialmikepence.com. You'll see what the plans are. But all very good points, David. It's, maybe it's kind of a variation on the old give 'em enough rope, but politically speaking. David, thank you for the call. Where this is going, the reason why it's so hard to predict, and this is the problem, is that Trump has no philosophical core. There's no there. He just says whatever he thinks is going to get him the most love over the next hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Which, by the way, is no way to run a country or a presidency. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Let's see here. David watching Free Speech TV in Columbus, Ohio on the Dish Network. Hey, David, what's on your mind?
Hello?
Hey, David, you're on the air.
Yeah. Well, I just, first of all, I want to thank you for taking my call. As far as I'm concerned, you're the man.
Thank you.
Changed life. We're tap dancing around the facts here, and I think we are expecting rationality out of someone who's mentally ill. And I think the only way to put a stop to this before some real damage is done is to invoke the 25th Amendment. I don't think that impeaching Donald Trump is a viable alternative. There's too much politics in it.
Right.
But I was married to someone with bipolar disorder for 10 years. And let me tell you, when you're dealing with someone who's mentally ill, you're in over your head. And there's, if you're a rational person, you tend to think, I can turn this around. Let me tell you something. You can't. You can't argue with a sick mind, period.
Mm. But Donald Trump is not exhibiting symptoms of bipolar disorder. I haven't seen mania or depression from him.
That's not what I'm saying, Tom. I'm saying that mental illness is what it is.
I see. So you think the mental illness he's suffering is every bit as severe as bipolar disorder?
Well, he's a narcissistic sociopath as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
And he exhibits that. But what I'm saying, and I didn't mean that he was bipolar.
Right.
Because I know that that's not what it is. But what I'm saying is that you can't argue with a sick mind. You can't bring someone to rationality. And here this man is walking around with nuclear codes. Look at what he just did just a couple of days ago. This guy is a loose cannon, and you can't, like I said, you can't argue with a sick mind. If you say it's black, he's going to say it's white. If you say it's white, he's going to say it's black.
So here's the 25th Amendment. Whenever the vice president and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments, that would be his cabinet, or of such other body as Congress may by law provide. Now that's interesting. Congress could pass a law saying, we designate these 10 people as the arbiters of the president's mental health. It still has to be led by the vice president. Whenever the vice president and a majority of either the principal officers or of such body as Congress may be by law provide, transmit to the President pro tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, the Vice President shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as the acting President. Thereafter, when the President transmits to the President pro tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives his written declaration that no inability exists, this is Trump protesting, he shall resume the powers and duties of his office unless the Vice President and a majority of either the principal officers of the Executive Department or other such bodies as Congress may by law provide transmit within 4 days to the President pro tem of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. And in that case, you've got, basically within 21 days, Congress has to determine by a 2/3 vote of both the House and the Senate that the President can't fulfill the office. That's a pretty high bar. David, thanks for the call. Welcome back. So just to clarify on the 25th Amendment, the 25th Amendment says, and keep in mind, this was written after we'd had a president who had had a stroke in office, that was Woodrow Wilson, who had had a heart attack in office, that was Dwight Eisenhower, who'd been assassinated in office, this was John Kennedy. After 3 presidents in the lifetime of the people who wrote the 25th Amendment had been incapacitated in office. Oh, and Reagan was shot as well and was out of commission for a few days. Remember Al Haig saying, I'm in charge here. They decided there's got to be some kind of order of secession here that makes sense. And so the 25th Amendment says that basically if the vice president and one of 2 groups, and this is where it gets really interesting. One group is basically the president's cabinet, the senior officials in the White House. The other group is whatever group Congress designates. So if you could get it passed through the House of Representatives and the Senate that a group of 15 or 20 psychiatrists were the designated representatives of Congress to determine the health and ability of the president to continue his functions, that would be the group that under the 25th Amendment would make the decision. Congress can choose the group that they want. If they don't, they get the cabinet. So the vice president and this group transmits this to the president pro tem of the Senate and to the Speaker of the House, to Mitch McConnell and to Paul Ryan, and says, okay, here's we think the president is not capable of discharging his duties. The president then has 4 days to respond and say, no, I'm just fine. And if he does, he's back in power. And Congress then has 3 weeks to decide by a 2/3 majority in both the House and the Senate that body that they appointed, that group of psychiatrists or politicians or whoever that they appointed, or the cabinet, whoever wrote the letter telling them the president can't serve, they have 21 days to decide which it's going to be and decide who's going to be the next president of the United States. It's a pretty damn high bar at a partisan time, but this guy is getting scarier and scarier, and he's more and more frightening Republicans. So we'll see where this goes. Gary in North Bangor, New York. Hey, Gary, what's up?
Use the 25th Amendment. That's what we need to do.
Okay, so to do the 25th Amendment, it's extremely unlikely the president's cabinet is going to certify that he's nuts, because most of his cabinet is made up of billionaires like him, a few of whom are probably just as crazy as he is. So, and certainly most of them have, personal relationships, loyalties, and shared class interest. So the first step, if Congress is going to use the 25th Amendment, would be to designate a body of people to determine the president's fitness for office. That's something that maybe we could start encouraging our members of Congress to do. You think, Gary?
Well, we got to do something.
Yeah.
That's all we can do, isn't it?
I'm with you. So if my read of the 25th Amendment is right, and keep in mind, I'm not a legal scholar. In fact, I'm not even a lawyer. But I play one on radio, I guess, or in writing or whatever. I'm somewhat familiar with the law, particularly constitutional law. And it certainly appears to me that Congress could get ahead of this right now by designating a group that is going to be the arbiter of Trump's mental health. Now, obviously, this is going to get very partisan very quickly. Philip in Warner Robins, Georgia. Hey, Philip, your thoughts on this?
Hey, Tom. Been listening a long time. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure, thank you.
I just wanted to ask you what you think about Trump supporters and what they would do in the event that he is removed from office, because I really think that he's on his way out with this Mueller investigation, his incompetence that he's showing more and more every day. I think we're really looking at President Pence coming up soon, but I'm just wondering what you think his supporters are going to do.
Yeah.
Because some of these people have really drank the Kool-Aid, and they are deep into thinking that this guy is their last white hope.
Yeah, I agree. I am old enough to remember Richard Nixon, and a lot of Republicans were absolutely opposed to the efforts to impeach Nixon. They thought that Watergate was a second-rate burglary. It wasn't a big deal. This was a conspiracy by the liberal intelligentsia coming out of the Washington Post, Woodward and Bernstein, and all those guys. It wasn't until Nixon's crimes were laid out in such detail in the public forum of the congressional hearings, Senator Sam Ervin running most of them, it wasn't until Americans actually saw this irrefutably in an unbiased, relatively speaking, media that even the Nixon loyalists said, okay, time for Jerry Ford. And my concern is that we've got a small subset of the American population, arguably 15–20%. I was in a doctor's office I was in the hospital last week. I went in for an MRI over at one of the hospitals here in D.C. And in the waiting room, in the imaging center, in the hospital, inside the hospital, waiting for the MRI, what's on? Fox News on the TV. Clearly somebody had asked them to put it on Fox News. I've talking to the people who were running the center there. I don't think in their wildest dreams any of them were Fox News supporters. But it's like there is this group of people now that did not exist in 1974 who live in a complete information bubble. They get all their news from right-wing hate radio and Fox so-called news. And the result of that is that even if Trump's crimes are laid out, they won't know. Or what they'll know is not necessarily the case, as is often the case with people who watch Fox News or get their news from right-wing hate radio. They believe things that aren't true. So I'm just really concerned that it might be very, very difficult this time around, and therefore, impeachment for crimes as opposed to 25th Amendment for mental incompetence. If he was taken down for mental incompetence using the 25th Amendment, I think that would outrage his base. And that would be arguably a dangerous thing for the United States, even though I'm saying, hey, maybe we have to do this. I mean, we're talking war and peace. We're talking survival of the planet. Jackie in Minneapolis. Hey, Jackie, got about a minute and a half. What's up?
Well, two quick questions related. I'm hearing that possibly North Korea attack might be Trump's Reichstag event.
Yes.
And the second question I have real quick is, if he were to attack North Korea, say with nuclear weapons, based upon a threat, would that not be a war crime?
Whether it's a war crime or not, that would have to be adjudicated by the Hague, and we're no longer a signatory to that agreement, so we couldn't. The United States, the President of the United States, could not even be held to account at the Hague. With regard to the Reichstag-Gebüge or the Reichstag fire, I don't disagree, and this is not something new, by the way. I would say that in a small way, Reagan's Grenada was a small Reichstag fire. We were in the midst of a serious recession when Reagan invaded Grenada, and his popularity was tanking. George Herbert Walker Bush, when he attacked, Kuwait and Iraq, his popularity was way down, and he was running for re-election. So he had his little Reichstag fire. George W. Bush, 9/11. They pulled out that Patriot Act and bang, rammed it right through Congress. He had his Reichstag fire. Now, none of them used these events to completely alter the nature of American democracy, but every single one of them substantially eroded American democracy. And yeah, I think if we had a war with North Korea, democracy may not survive it. Jackie, thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by EcoWine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, EcoWine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from ADD Success Stories, a guide for fulfillment to fulfillment for families with attention deficit disorder. And it's really individuals as well. And mostly the book is well over 100 individual stories about ways that people have learned how to be successful in life and just sharing them with others. A lot of these came from when I ran the ADD forum on CompuServe, and a lot of these are, other people's stories from CompuServe, some of them from when Louise was coaching, when we were running the community for ADHD kids, all kinds of stuff. So anyhow, this is from chapter 5, page 47, titled Learning How to Handle Criticism and Self-Criticism. And it opens with a quote from Benjamin Disraeli in 1860. He said, "It's much easier to be critical than to be correct." One of the most common and recurring strategies that successful hunters, that's people with ADD, tell about is how they've learned to handle criticism. A successful ADD entrepreneur tells the story of how devastated he was in a high school presentation that he'd spent the better part of 2 months on for English class. He read dozens of books, dug out arcane facts, sifted through quotes and stories and information, all to find what he thought was the absolutely perfect summary to make his point. With great enthusiasm, he pulled an all-nighter, writing the final paper, and marched off to school the next day with his head high and the smell of academic victory in his nostrils. At 2 o'clock, he walked into his English classroom and marched up to the teacher's desk, a paper in his hand. "Here it is," he said, and handed it to her with a dramatic flourish. She took one glance at it, leaned over the side of the desk, and dropped it into the wastebasket. "You didn't double spaces," she said. "When are you going to learn to read the directions?" Stunned, he began to protest, to tell her about the hours of work he'd done. She shook her head as if shaking his words out of her ears and interrupted him, saying, "You have to learn how to do things right. This will be a good lesson for you. I'm giving you an F for that paper, and there's no appeal because today was the last day you could hand it in." He went home that night and at the ripe old age of 14 cried himself to sleep. "I learned 2 important lessons from that experience," he told me 20 years later. "The first was that I needed to slow down to force myself to read directions. In that regard, it was probably a positive experience. But it also almost destroyed my commitment to her, to the class, to the school, and to any future academic achievement. And that was where I learned my second and most important lesson. When you fall down, stand back up, dust yourself off, and carry on." "That sounds easy," I said, "but how do you do it? How do you go from being angry about her, from blaming her, or for that matter, from blaming yourself?" "I have a picture in my mind," he said, "of a man who's walking down a dusty rural road. He trips on a stone and falls face first into the dirt. Then he reaches over to the side of the road, grabs a stick, and begins to beat himself over the head with a stick, yelling at himself about how stupid he was to trip and fall. Between these comments, he's cursing the stone for being there and blaming it for tripping him. That's absurd, isn't it? But that's just what many people do. And when I imagine that picture and I see how absurd it is to wallow in self-blame, I feel empowered to get on with my life." End of quote. Unfortunately, the absurd behavior that this entrepreneur described is just what so many people do, particularly those who've spent their lives feeling like they've never quite lived up to their potential. They respond to criticism first by blaming the critic and then by beating themselves up. They rationalize the former by taking a debating position, finding flaws in the criticism or the critic, and then rationalize the latter by telling themselves that if they beat themselves up emotionally, they'll learn from the experience. In real life, it rarely works that way. People who pursue this strategy instead just end up bruised and ineffectual, paralyzed by fear of criticism or by the damage they do to themselves in the name of lesson learning. So how can we best handle criticism? And then we go through some more stories. The first step is to examine the criticism to see if there's any truth in it. Usually there is some truth to criticism, and if we can separate out the kernel of truth from the emotional baggage associated with it, we could often learn something useful. For example, when my first book on ADD was published, one reviewer wrote a scathing and sarcastic commentary on it. While much of the commentary was off base or factually inaccurate, he did point out one real deficiency. My premise of Hunters and Farmers was based on anthropology, but I hadn't gotten the endorsement of any anthropologists or cited any anthropological texts in my bibliography. So, deciding that he had a point, I sought out people with the requisite knowledge of hunting and farming culture. I first found Will Kreinen, MD, who, while not an anthropologist, was one of the few medical doctors in the world to have spent years of his career as the physician to an indigenous hunting society, one of the last of the Native American tribes in Canada. Every year, he followed them with his small plane as they made their annual 1,000-mile trek with the caribou they hunted. He told me that when he first arrived, he found that the previous doctor had diagnosed 100% of their children with ADD and put the entire school on Ritalin. That, for me, was a pretty good validation of the hunter-farmer theory. Then I met cultural anthropologist Jay Fikes, PhD, who wrote the famous books debunking Carlos Castaneda. Dr. Fikes obtains his PhD by studying the few remaining Native American hunting societies of the American Southwest and northern Mexico. After reading my book, he wrote a ringing endorsement of it, saying that his experience taught him that hunting and agricultural societies were profoundly different, and that the individuals who make them up are profoundly different. There's a startlingly high percentage of what we would call ADD among some of the members of native hunting tribes. So that criticism of my book, as sarcastic and stinging as it was, made the book better. Anyhow, the book is ADD Success Stories, A Guide to Fulfillment for Families with Attention Deficit Disorder.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Quite the day. Quite the day. So where is Donald Trump taking us? This Dana Milbank has a piece in today's Washington Post titled "The Trump Cleanup Patrol Just Had Its Biggest Job Yet." Just, imagine those guys who walk around behind the elephants in the circus. This is basically, he's got 3 generals now walking around with the brooms and whatnot. It's getting pretty grim. In the meantime, I'm very pleased to have on the line with us Governor Don Siegelman, the former governor of Alabama, 1999 to 2003. His story is profiled in the new documentary by Steve Wimberly, Atticus versus the Architect, the political assassination of Don Siegelman. Of course, Steve Wimberly was on our show yesterday talking about this. The website free-don.us, and you can tweet him at Don Siegelman, Siegelman. Governor, welcome back to the program.
Yes, Tom. The last time I was on live on your show, the phone call was interrupted, and I was taken to solitary confinement for about 60 days. So let's hope Jeff Sessions doesn't have that in store for me after this phone call.
Yes, I was. I don't remember where I was, but Sam Sachs was filling in for me that day, and I'm so sorry that happened to you. And
well, it was an innocent phone call. I was calling to encourage your listeners and viewers to get in touch with their members of Congress to try to bring this Safe Justice Act to the floor for a vote. And one of the things that I learned while I was in prison is that our criminal justice system has flaws, and it needs to be fixed. That's my calling now. I'm hopeful that, once things settle down and once I have a little more freedom to travel, I can get to some members of Congress and make my case and offer some suggestions that will hopefully help balance the scales of justice and, in a sense, reset our moral compass, at least as far as criminal justice is concerned.
Yeah. I'm still concerned, frankly, about the theft of our elections. I mean, this, in my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, this all began when you went to bed in November of 2002, as I recall, thinking that you had won the election, had been called by the AP and everything else for governor of Alabama against Bob Riley, the Republican, who was, being supported by Karl Rove. And in the morning, you woke up and you had not won the election. Do you care to speak of that, or would you rather?
Well, the way I have to take issue with your phraseology. Actually, I did win the election, and when I woke up, the election had been stolen with the help of two people, one who immediately went to work for Jack Abramoff or Jack Abramoff related company, the Alexandria Group, and the other who was Karl Rove's client and Jeff Sessions' protege, Bill Pryor, who was quickly nominated and confirmed on a he took the office on a recess appointment because Democrats in the Senate refused to confirm him.
It's to a federal judgeship, right?
Yeah, he is on the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, through which all of my appeals had to travel. And after he was appointed to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, Jeff Sessions said, we would have put him on the court earlier, but we needed a Republican governor in place first. Bill Pryor was the one who sealed the election for my opponent by certifying the false ballots, the false election totals in 2002. He illegally certified those 2 days before state law allows. So anyway, we are. So my after that, I said, well, look, I'm gonna live to fight again, and I'll run in 2006. And it was after that Jeff Sessions' retired FBI agents started building a case against me. I think your listeners might be interested in noting that in 2003, when political surveys showed that I would win re-election easily in 2006, the state Republican Party chairman, Marty Connors, went to Washington to meet with Jeff Sessions to understand the parameters under which Jeff Sessions would run for governor against me in 2006. It was after that meeting that Jeff Sessions' retired FBI agents, who used to work for him when he was the U.S. attorney in the Southern District, built the two cases against me, one in 2004, which the federal judge presiding said it was the most unfounded criminal case over which he had presided in his entire 30 years on the bench, and then the other in 2006, of which cost me the election in 2006, and also cost me 88 months of my life.
Yeah, in a federal prison. The weaponization of the criminal justice system is something that we've come to expect from, brutal despotic regimes. Whether it's the communist government of China or Cambodia or something like that, Vietnam. But it's not something that has historically been trained in the United States against politicians, arguably with the exception of against people of color who have political aspirations, particularly, from the 1870s to the 1970s, arguably.
Sure.
But can you speak to that, this weaponization of the criminal justice system?
Well, it is clear that.
Oh, we just lost Governor Siegelman. Hopefully he'll call us right back. So, but we're talking with Governor Don Siegelman. There's a new movie about his life and experiences. The title of the movie is Atticus versus the Architect: The Political Assassination of Don Siegelman. The website for the movie is atticusvthearchitect.com. And, of course, the website is free-don.us. You can tweet him at Don Siegelman, Siegelman. And he has not called back, Nate. Yeah, I hope that, the last time Don Siegelman was on this show, this kind of thing happened. He got cut off because he got dragged off into solitary confinement for the next 6 months just for speaking to us on the air. Hopefully that is not what is happening right now. Anyhow, I'm going to hit a break here, and we will see if we can reconnect with Governor Siegelman and continue this conversation. But this is an amazing story. If you're not familiar with Governor Siegelman's story, go to free-don.us and check it out. It is breathtaking what has happened. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more right after this. Stick around. And welcome back. Ed in Miami, Florida. Hey, Ed, thanks for watching Free Speech on Dish Network. What's on your mind?
Thanks for taking my call, Tom. I'm really wanted to talk about the famine in Yemen and that's taking place not only in Yemen, but in several other countries.
The what that's taking place in Yemen? The war?
Famine.
Oh, the famine. Oh, yeah. Okay. It's not just famine, by the way. There's a cholera epidemic going on there, too, which makes famine far worse.
Yes. Isn't the United Nations, has the United Nations declared it a international emergency, or is this still being kicked around?
To the best of my knowledge, the UN has not, and I'm not sure why. Ed, let me put you on hold. We can come back to this conversation because Don Siegelman's back on the line here and want to pick him back up. Governor, welcome back.
Well, I don't know what happened. I was giving this most wonderful soliloquy, and you were off the air. I was off the air. So.
Yeah, suddenly you vanished. You can try it again. We're going to hit a break in about 3 minutes, and then we can come back from the break, and we can continue this, too. But we're on the air right now, so you can finish your point. We were talking about the weaponization of our criminal justice system.
Yeah, and I was saying that, we know that my election was stolen. We know that the Department of Justice was used as a political weapon. We know that the Department of Justice has been engaged in a cover-up of its own wrongdoing. We know that the U.S. attorney who led my political prosecution now has managed to get the documentary banned in the heart of Dixie. And we have a president who's seemingly thumbs his nose at and challenges constitutional restraints on the presidency. And one has to wonder what kind of democracy we are currently living in. And that's why I encourage your listeners and readers and followers and viewers to go to free-don.org and sign our petition demanding that the censorship of the documentary of Atticus versus the Architect, the political assassination of Don Siegelman, be shown, and that the ban in Montgomery be lifted.
Is this all of Montgomery, Alabama, or is this just the Capri Theater? That's just.
Well, it's just the Capri Theater, but that was the theater that Steve Wembley had a contract with to show the documentary, and then they pulled the contract when they realized that the documentary was going to be embarrassing to one of their board members, Laura Canary, who is, of course, featured in the documentary because she engaged in multiple acts of misconduct.
Right. But there's no, this is a private company. There's no way you can compel them to play the movie.
No, it's I think it's a 501c4, group that independent.
So why not get one of the biggest bars in town, and like one of the big sports bars, and have all the TVs play the movie, charge admission at the door just as if it was a movie theater, but it's a sports bar. And, it can hold a couple hundred people and show the movie that way and, just do it.
I think that's a great idea. I have nothing to do with the documentary. I don't have any financial interest in it. But I will pass that along to the filmmaker. And, I think people in Montgomery would probably enjoy a good beer watching this.
I would think so. And, if you can find a philosophically aligned bar. We're talking with Don Siegelman. You can stick around for a second, Governor?
Oh, sure.
Okay, great. Hang on just a second. We just have to hit this little break here. We'll be right back. Don Siegelman is with us.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
Welcome back. We're talking with Governor Don Siegelman, the governor of Alabama, 1999 to 2003. His story profiled in the new documentary by Steve Wimberly, Atticus versus the Architect, the political assassination of Don Siegelman. The website free-don.org or free-don.us. You can tweet him at Don Siegelman, S-I-E-G-E-L-M-A-N. Governor, we lost our phone connection as you were speaking to the issue of the weaponization of our criminal justice system here in the United States. You want to just recap real quickly what you were saying?
Well, it's both unfortunate and, of course, wrong. And I think that, of course, my story emanates from Karl Rove at the Department of at the White House in 2001, and after the Kiplinger letter touted me as a possible Democrat who could put the party together to challenge George W. Bush in 2004. That's when things started to rev up, and Karl Rove's best friend and former business partner, Billy Canary, his wife was confirmed as U.S. attorney, and she kicked a federal investigation into high gear. I was initially brought to trial in 2004 and then again in 2006 while her husband was running my opponent's general election campaign. So, at least in my case, I know and understood where the matter was coming from. It was coming from Karl Rove and Karl Rove's forces in Alabama, who did not want me to be reelected first in 2002 because they knew I was going to enter the primaries, Democratic primaries, and hopefully have an opportunity to be on the ticket to challenge George W. Bush in 2004. After I was indicted and acquitted, or the government dismissed the charges in 2004, we revved up again, looking at 2006, and again it was Jeff Sessions' retired FBI agents. It wasn't the FBI that came after me. It was retired FBI agents working for Karl Rove's client, Bill Pryor, who built the case against me in 2004 and 2006. So there's no question that this was a political hit. It is admitted in this letter by the Department of Justice, the Office of Professional Responsibility, which is still under seal by the Department of Justice. It is the subject of it and other documents that the Department of Justice are refusing to release regarding their misconduct is the subject of a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, which is pending in the Northern District of Alabama. This lawsuit, Tom, is our last legal effort to seek disclosure. What we're hoping is that the federal judge will open the flap of the tent and let some of the stench out and some light in to shed light on the government misconduct.
Yeah, this is serious stuff. We have about 3 minutes till we hit the bottom of the hour here, Governor. You're obviously working to clear your name, and I have been loudly supportive of that effort from day one. And people need to call their members of Congress at 202-224-3121 and ask for some light to be brought on this issue. What specific and check out this movie, Atticus versus the Architect. But beyond that, what can people do in support of what you're doing? A, and B, what are your plans going forward?
Well, I think at the present time, the best thing that I can ask people to do is to go online to free-don.org and sign the petition. And secondly, my plans are to speak out about the flaws in our justice system. Think about this. If President Obama's lawyer, the Solicitor General, can argue to the U.S. Supreme Court that United States citizens do not have a constitutional right not to be framed. Think about that. Obama's lawyer argues that we don't have a constitutional right not to be framed. If it was that bad under President Obama, what will it be like under Jeff Sessions and Donald Trump?
Whoa.
So,
Wait, they actually argued in federal court that there was nothing wrong with the state of Alabama framing you?
No, they argued it.
Or the federal prosecutor framing you?
The Solicitor General argued to the United States Supreme Court on January the 4th, 2010, that U.S. citizens don't have a constitutional right not to be framed. The point I'm making is that even at the highest level, there's an umbrella of protection over prosecutors and investigators to get convictions by any means necessary.
Right.
And wrong-headed people argue that we not only need to do that, but we need to give these people the longest prison sentences possible. So there are multiple things multiple issues that need to be attacked and corrected and modified to balance the scales of justice. That's what I hope to do in the coming years. And so right now, go to my website, free-don.org, sign the petition, and I'll when things loosen up and I'm able to travel, I'm going to be in D.C. arguing with members of Congress to make some changes in our justice system.
Well, that's great. The seat right next to me here is got your name on it, Governor. It's I hope you can come and visit us and be live and on the air with us. And I look forward to future conversations. I'd like to know more about your criminal justice reform ideas and your experiences in prison. I hope that you will come back.
I will.
Okay, great. Governor Don Siegelman, check out his website, free-don.org. Governor, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Tom.
Great talking with you. Great talking. So glad that you are out. It is wonderful.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with your calls, my thoughts, and the news of the day right after this. Hi, it's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. We're reading today from Rebooting the American Dream, from the introduction. It's titled Back to the Future. On April 14th, 1789, George Washington was out walking through the fields at Mount Vernon, his home in Virginia, when Charles Thomson, the Secretary of the Continental Congress, rode up on horseback. Thomson had a letter for Washington from the President pro tem of the new constitutionally created United States Senate, telling Washington that he'd just been elected president, and the inauguration was set for April 30th in the nation's capital, New York City. This created two problems for George Washington. The first was saying goodbye to his 82-year-old mother, which the 57-year-old Washington did that night. She gave him her blessing and told him it was the last time he'd see her alive, as she was gravely ill, and indeed she died before he returned from New York. The second problem was finding a suit of clothes made in the United States of America. For that, he sent a courier to his old friend and fellow general from the American Revolutionary War, Henry Knox. Washington couldn't find a suit made in America because in the years prior to the American Revolution, the British East India Company, whose tea was thrown into the Boston harbor by outraged colonists after the Tea Act of 1773, gave the world's largest transnational corporation a giant tax break. The boss of the British East India Tea Company controlled the manufacture and the transportation of a whole range of goods, including fine clothing. Cotton and wool could be grown and sheared in the colonies, but it had to be sent to England to be turned into clothing. This was a routine policy for England, and it's why until India achieved its independence in 1947, Mahatma Gandhi, who was assassinated a year later, sat at his spinning wheel for his lectures and daily spun clothing in his own home. It was, like his Salt March, a protest against the colonial practices of England and an entreaty to his fellow Indians to make their own clothes to gain independence from British companies and institutions, even though making their own clothes or making their own salt was against British law. Fortunately for George Washington, an American clothing company had been established on April 28, 1783 in Hartford, Connecticut, by a man named Daniel Hinsdale. And it produced high-quality woolen and cotton clothing, as well as items made from imported silk. It was to Hinsdale's company that Knox turned, and he helped Washington get, in time for his inauguration 2 weeks later, a nice, but not excessively elegant, brown American-made suit. He wore British black later for the celebration and the most famous painting, but he was sworn in wearing an American-made suit. When Washington became president in 1789, most of America's personal and industrial products of any significance were manufactured in England or in other British colonies. Washington asked his Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, what could be done about that, and Hamilton came up with an 11-point plan to foster American manufacturing, which he presented to Congress in 1791. By 1793, most of its points had either been made into law by Congress or formulated into policy by either President Washington or the various states, which put our country on a path of developing its industrial base and generating the largest source of federal revenue for more than 100 years. Those strategic proposals built the greatest industrial powerhouse the world had ever seen. And after more than 200 successful years, Alexander Hamilton's program was only abandoned during the administrations of Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and Bill Clinton, and remained abandoned to this day. Modern-day China, however, implemented most of Hamilton's plan just in the 1990s, and has brought about a remarkable transformation of its nation in a single generation. Hamilton's 11-point plan for American manufacturers is a primary inspiration for this book. It was part of a larger work titled Alexander Hamilton's Report on the Subject of Manufactures, made in his capacity as Secretary of the Treasury. It's the official title. And then I list Hamilton's 11-point plan for American manufacturers. And I'll share just the headlines of this. He starts out by saying, a full view now having been taken to the inducements to the promotion of manufacturers in the United States, in other words, why we should do this, accompanied with an examination of the principal objections, which are commonly urged in opposition. This was Jefferson's objection that he didn't want America to be a manufacturing nation. He wanted us to be an agricultural nation. Hamilton says, it is proper in the next place to consider the means by which it may be effected. So here he says, in order to a better judgment of the means proper to be presented to the United States, it will be of use to advert to those which have been employed with success in other countries. In other words, they're stealing this idea from England. It was called the Tudor Plan when King Henry VII came up with it. So number one, protecting duties, import taxes, now called tariffs, or duties on those foreign articles which are the rivals of domestic ones intended to be encouraged. So number one, raise the cost of imported goods. Number two, prohibition of rival articles or duties equivalent to prohibitions. On some things that we think it's really important to make in America, make the duties, the tariffs, so high that nobody would want to import them, so there'll be a strong domestic manufacturing presence. Three, prohibitions on the exportation of materials of manufacture. Why provide raw materials to other countries, like we're doing right now to China, to make stuff to sell back to us when we can simply make it here, manufacture it here? Number four, pecuniary bounties. This is one of the most efficacious means of encouraging manufacturers, basically, subsidizing growing and new nascent industries. So that's just up to number four. There are 11 points. The rest of it's all in the book, Rebooting the American Dream, and you can find it online. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Oh, this is interesting. Isaiah 66. This is the King James Version. N. Raleigh Liberal posting over at Democratic Underground. Quoting another DU or Grasswire. Isaiah 66:15-7, King James Version. For behold, the Lord will come with fire, and with his chariots like a whirlwind, to render his anger with fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. I was wondering where that came from. I mean, fury is not a word that you would expect, right? It's, you know, fire and fury. I mean, I remember listening to that and thinking, you know, this is a it's an anachronistic phrase. It's not, you know, common contemporary usage. Very, very strange stuff. Very strange stuff. Anyhow, William in Cape Coral, Florida. Hey, William, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Yeah, I wanted to talk about the situation with Trump and North Korea.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of wanted to get some insight from you because I'm younger, 25, and I kind of recently got into politics because of Bernie. Been trying to catch up. But the question is, I suppose, with how Trump is and the advisors around him, is it a mixture of he's literally just that stupid that he doesn't do his research on the North Korean people? Or is there some type of benefit he'll get out with going to war with North Korea that maybe I'm not aware of?
Yeah, I don't think there's any benefit to anybody. There's a few defense contractors who probably think they can make some money on it, but in the end, pretty much everybody always loses in war. You know, when we were kids, William, most of us had the experience of reading stories, mostly fairy tales. You know, the emperor who has no clothes. You know, the king who's like a total doofus, and he's taken in by the guys who say, "Oh yeah, this invisible clothing is like the only the noble can see it." You know, and oh yes, I can see that. There were a bunch of them. I mean, the Humpty Dumpty story was about an old king. This idea of the autocrat, the king, who really is incompetent, is one that has, you know, a thread that has flown through Western civilization for millennia, and I think that that's exactly where we are. That we've finally elected an idiot as president of the United States, and I don't mean that clinically. Idiot used to be a term that referred to a particular band of IQ. There's no doubt in my mind that Trump has a normal IQ, but you know, he's severely broken, you know, severely damaged in a whole bunch of regards in this. So I think that that's the Occam's razor. You know, the easiest answer is that. William, thanks for the call. Jeanette in Richland Center, Wisconsin. Hey, Jeanette, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I had a revelation happen to me last night. I turned on Lou Dobbs. I watch a lot of political stations, so I just turned on because I did. And
Lou Dobbs is on Fox or Fox Business?
The thing that shocked me the most, they went after to kill the Republican Party, literally. They attacked them, including Mitch McConnell. The whole Republican Party is spineless. They're no good. The kids should turn your kids' face away from the television when they're on. Why is Fox News destroying the Republican Party? And then, of course, their triumphant savior is Trump.
Yeah.
So I can't see what they're doing. They're destroying the Republican Party. For what reason is Trump going to start a third party? And then also, I'm stepping out on a limb here, but I see Putin in the Republican Party and Putin and Fox News going after the same people. It was McMaster's, or even Paul Ryan is in the gun sites now. Please explain to me, and thank you. Monica got just a minute's notice that he got his house FBI investigation. Never mentioned reasons why, what, nothing. Thanks.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting that we have a television network owned by a billionaire, Rupert Murdoch. And if you look at the genesis of the modern-day Tea Party, the original Tea Party was started in the 1980s by the tobacco lobby as a way of protesting anti-smoking laws. So this is when restaurants were just starting to say you can't smoke in our restaurant. That was the first Tea Party. The brand was picked up by the petro billionaires in the 2000s, and you know, the original thing that it was opposed to, that Wall Street guy who famously in 2009, I think it was, said on I think it was CNN, said we need a Tea Party, and he was credited as being the guy who kicked it off. Well, actually, it was the petro billionaires and the oligarchs that were promoting this. But the thing that he was complaining about, this guy whose name is now kind of lost to the mists of history as the so-called founder of the Tea Party, what he was complaining about was the possibility that the Obama administration or the Bush administration, actually, I don't recall exactly when that happened. I'm pretty sure it was Obama, though, in the first year of the Obama administration, that they would help out homeowners, that they would help out some of the 9.1 million homeowners who lost their homes because of the crimes of the banksters on Wall Street. This guy was a Wall Street trader. And he was like, what? We're going to bail these people out? And that became the Tea Party. So we've got a movement funded by oligarchs. You've got news media funded by oligarchs. It seems that there's a possibility that the Republican Party is splitting in half. That you've got the oligarchic branch of the Republican Party, which is, the Fox News, the right-wing hate radio guys who are funded also by oligarchs. And then you've got and much of the so-called base, the Trump base, is following them. And then you've got the more institutional, the Reince Priebus Republican Party, which has been largely taken over by oligarchs, but at the same time still has some, still gives lip service anyway to, quote, Republican principles, whatever, typically hate, right? Homophobia, racism, things like that. But, is the Republican Party going to split up over this or around this? I don't know. It's an interesting question. Susie in Vaughan, Washington. Hey, Susie, what's up?
Hey, thank you for taking my call, and you of all people would be able to explain the difference here. But my question is, with the president and what he just said about raining this horror on Korea and his people, essentially killing them, how is that legal and okay and not considered premeditated when somebody like you or I, or if we were to say to our husbands or friends, I'm going to go kill a bunch of people tomorrow, premeditated, and then I do it, how come he gets to do it? I don't understand why he even gets legally to be considered to do something so horrible.
Because there's one,
legal?
There are two forms of murder that we have legalized in the world, not just the United States. One is killing by the state, which is, in the United States, we call it the death sentence, and also the ability of police officers to kill people. So killings by the state are legal. Killing under the color of law, I believe, is the legal phrase for it. And the second is war. It's organized mass murder, but it is legal with the declaration of war. And so Donald Trump was not threatening something that's illegal. He was threatening. He was saying something that was stupid. I mean, diplomatically speaking, you've got half the State Department and half the Pentagon right now, running around like chickens, just freaking out. What are we going to do about this? Not to mention the South Koreans and the Japanese and others. But Susie, he didn't do anything illegal. He just, politically, hopefully he did something illegal. That is to say, it's going to cause people to not vote for Republicans in 2018 and 2020 because, holy cow, this is what Republicans bring us. But it's not illegal. Susie, thank you for the call. Michael in Los Angeles. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I have a quick question. A couple of days ago, or it might have been last week, we were talking about how the West Virginia governor he flipped over and now he's Republican.
Yes.
And we were talking about how
Jim Justice is his name.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, right. That's right, Mr. Justice. And now they have a 26-state majority in their state houses and governorship. And then you mentioned something about they can do a constitutional convention if they have the right number of states.
Right. It takes 24 to call it, 28 to ratify it.
28 to ratify. Now, what exactly can they do with the Constitutional Convention?
Anything they damn well please. It just all, you have to write, when you don't literally rewrite the Constitution. What you do is you come up with a bunch of amendments that effectively rewrite the Constitution, something that's been done many times. And so they would propose a series of amendments. We know that at least one of the ones that the right-wingers want to push is an amendment requiring the debt not be held by the United States, but rather be held by banks on Wall Street. So the Wall Street bankers get to make all the money off the national debt rather than the government. There's that, the whole balanced budget, no deficit thing, which is crazy. I mean, the last time we paid off the national debt, the only time in the history of the United States we paid off the national debt was during the administration of Andrew Jackson. And it threw us into the greatest and longest and deepest depression in the history of the United States. But I'm guessing that also that they would want to roll back the First Amendment, and they would want to have a system more like in the UK, where journalists and public figures can sue for libel just as easily as the average person. Here in the United States, it's very difficult for a public figure to sue for libel. I'm guessing that they would want to enshrine in the Constitution permanently that corporations are people and that rich people can own politicians, that money is speech.
2018 is the Super Bowl we're kind of looking at here. Yeah.
So that's what I'm expecting, and they can basically do all that, and frankly, they could even write into it that you can only vote if you have a passport. I mean, they can write anything they damn well please into the Constitution. So they will, if they do this, they will make it much, much harder for people to vote and for America to be a small d, a democratic small r republic. Michael, thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Albert, watching Free Speech TV in St. Augustine, Florida. Hey, Albert, what's on your mind today?
Tom, I have a question. You had a gentleman there recently, I believe it was a recent show that wrote about unemployment and what was happening with the economy. No one seems to be raising a question about the signing of NAFTA by all but two members of Congress, and that Barron's reported when NAFTA was signed, we lost 10 million jobs to China, and it reduced the trade barriers to the point where we can get cheaply made foreign goods brought in here, competing with our high standard of living.
Yeah, the losing jobs to China would not be NAFTA. That because NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Agreement. That's United States, Mexico, and Canada. Although a lot of the factories that moved to Mexico in the early days of NAFTA have since moved to China. So, and Mexico and China, part of the WTO, and, that's all facilitated. So arguably there's something to what you're saying. But anyhow, where were you going with that, Albert?
Well, I just was wondering, I'm 83 years old, but I grew up in the 50s when we had factories in Boston on every floor of a warehouse, and they were all producing goods.
Yep.
There were plenty of jobs, and now they're all gone because they apparently removed the trade barriers or something. And no one seems to be addressing that problem and reestablishing the barriers.
This is the problem. You're absolutely right, Albert. And it wasn't just NAFTA; it was NAFTA and CAFTA and SHAFTA. I mean, it's the World Trade Organization. All these things, they are deals that work to the advantage of transnational corporations and billionaires, and to the disadvantage of individual nations, with the exception of China, apparently. And the ironic thing is that this is what Donald Trump ran for president on, was blowing up these deals, was I'm going to bring back your jobs. I'm going to stop the offshoring of jobs. Meanwhile, his daughter is still making everything in the Ivanka Trump line overseas, as far as I know. He is still making most of the things in the Donald Trump line overseas. And have the jobs come home? No. Even Carrier that Mike Pence bribed with millions of dollars from the Indiana Development Fund, even Carrier just sent another couple hundred jobs to Mexico. So I agree with you that these trade deals are a serious problem for us. The question is, will anybody have the political will to do it? I don't think you'll ever see a Republican who does. I don't think they're able to. Albert, thank you for the call. David in Pittsburgh, California. Hey, David, what's up? Korean history?
Yeah, let me mute my TV first. Yeah, originally the Korean War was started as a civil war between the North and South Korea.
Right.
And my comment is that Harry Truman, during his administration, got involved through his administration, through paranoid feeding, they believed that it was going to be a communist takeover of the Asian countries. So he stepped in, went to the UN, and asked the UN, can I go in there and resolve this problem through the UN? And he didn't want to declare it a war, so he declared it a police action.
Right. And this was, by the way, the earliest iteration of the old domino theory that came to be the rationale for Vietnam.
Yeah. And the problem with the police action, after 3 years of entertaining combat with the North, we signed an armistice, not a treaty, an armistice.
That's right. It's just a pause in the war. David, I'm sorry we're out of time, but thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you, and spot on. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by Loving What You Do, a new book by Ellen Ratner, and goatsfortheoldgoat.com. On the line with us, Victoria Jones. Hey, Victoria.
Hey, Tom.
So what's up today?
Well, I'd start with two pieces of climate news. The first is that the State of Climate in 2016 report, led by U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, with the help of scientists from 60 nations, found that the major indicators of climate change continued to reflect trends consistent with a warming planet. And this report has just come out. So NOAA's report says that 2016's heat, the highest in 137 years, came from a combination of a warming trend caused by human-induced greenhouse gas emissions and the El Nino weather pattern. But there were more alarming things in there. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere averaged 402.9 parts per million, which scientists believe to be the highest jump in about 800,000 years.
And we're not an 800,000-year-old species. We're only a 300,000-year-old species. So this is rather alarming.
I've got more. The global average sea level was also the highest on record, 3.25 inches above 1993 when satellite records began. And the lower troposphere, the atmosphere right above the Earth's surface, had the highest temperature on record, and the upper ocean's heat was close to a record.
Wow.
Meanwhile, Environmental Protection Agency head Scott Pruitt, the EPA, Scott Pruitt had Wednesday on a North Dakota talk radio station said that he has doubts that climate change poses a threat to the United States, and that's one of the reasons why he's organizing what he calls a red team, blue team exercise to try to challenge what he called so-called settled science on climate change. We've talked about, Scott, having a red team, blue team exercise where we bring red team scientists in, blue team in, ask the question, what do we know? What don't we know about this issue? The American people deserve an honest, open, transparent discussion about this supposed threat to this country, and we need to advance that.
You know, there was that guy who worked for the scientist who was hired by, I think it was one of the front groups that's funded by the Koch network, to take down climate science. And he did a deep dive into the climate science and came out saying, I'm a convert. I'm with Al Gore here. And of course he got dumped by the petro billionaires. But I mean, it's not inconceivable that this could work out that way.
It is possible. It is possible.
Yeah.
Two academic authors conducted a poll, and it's published in the Washington Post today. And they spoke to 650 respondents who said they focused on 650 respondents out of 1,300 Americans who said they identified with or leaned towards the Republican Party. And they found that 52% of those Republicans said they would back a postponement of the 2020 presidential election if President Trump proposed it to make sure only eligible American citizens can vote.
Wow.
And that rises to 56% if congressional Republicans and Trump.
So this big lie that Jude Wanniski proposed back in 1980, that ALEC took up in a big way about a decade ago, that has now populated, now spread itself across, 30 some odd states now that have voter ID laws and whatnot. This big lie that there are hordes of brown-skinned, Spanish-speaking people who are illegally voting in our elections has been adopted by the majority of the Republican Party officially.
68% of Republicans think millions of illegal immigrants voted in the presidential election. 73% think voter fraud happens somewhat or very often.
Wow. Well, I said this the other day. This is the upside of all this Russia hysteria and concern that, the Russians might have hacked our election or changed voted. So far there's no evidence that any voting machines were actually altered. But I'd say, let's look, and it's like Russia has given us, or has given the Democratic Party, permission to discuss something that they've been afraid to discuss since 2002 when Redshift first started happening, which is, that somebody might be hacking our election systems. Maybe we could use this to our advantage. I don't know. It's pretty spooky, though. Anyhow, what else is going on?
Well, it's interesting. As a sidebar to that, I don't have a story on it, but I saw one on AP yesterday, which was that, our voting system is very decentralized, as you know, and so everybody's always said, well, that's why it would be so difficult to successfully hack us nationwide. And interestingly, the point of this AP piece was that because the Electoral Fraud Commission wants the voting information of every single American and is going to put it all together, ironically, that would actually make America much easier to hack.
Yeah, well, I'm of the personal opinion that that's their goal, but that's a whole other discussion.
Interesting. A U.S. district judge in Austin, Texas, has rejected an effort by Texas to have a law that would punish sanctuary cities be declared constitutional ahead of the measure taking effect next month. So this is a victory for sanctuary cities.
Okay. Interesting.
Yes. This is a judge, Sam Sparks, appointed under Republican President George H.W. Bush. Now, this bill calls for jail time for police chiefs, sheriffs, possibly frontline officers who fail to cooperate with U.S. immigration officials. And basically they're saying, look, we don't. This is not. Why should this be constitutional before it even comes into effect? And the judge is saying, yeah, why should it be?
Remarkable. Victoria Jones with Talk Media News. Victoria, thank you so much for the report today.
Thank you.
Good talking with you. We'll be back. Rick Wartzman is going to be with us. We're going to be talking about how employers are basically ripping off America. We'll get into the details.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by EcoWine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, EcoWine.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
And welcome back to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Last Hours of Humanity, Warming the World to Extinction, a book about extinction. The climate scientists' warnings have come true. There is more carbon in our atmosphere, trapping heat and moisture, than ever before in the 165,000-year history of the human race. We are on the verge of the first ice-free summer in the Arctic in 3 million years. And back then, the Earth was a very different place from the one currently cradling us. The consequences of a warming planet are appearing much faster than had been projected by climate scientists of just a decade ago. The most dire warnings, rising oceans, freak storms, and agricultural collapse, they're all taking place right now. And it's going to get worse. But now other voices have entered the fray. Those of geologists who study the longer-term implications and histories of a planet undergoing rapid global warming. Specifically, they are focused on extinctions. The climate scientists, geologists, and those from related scientific disciplines need to continue talking to each other, because at some point we may be able to see the critical moment in which the current climate crosses from the realm of a global destabilizer to a global extinction event. We must wake up. It's hard to imagine life without Earth. We take the vast variety of life on this planet, and even our own existence, for granted. But numerous times in our planet's history, life as we know it has come close to disappearing entirely. We call these events mass extinctions, and we even teach school children about those times of great death on our planet. For example, we know that long ago, on a much more unstable planet, the dinosaurs were killed by an asteroid striking the Earth. This leads many people to believe that as long as we don't see an asteroid hurtling toward the planet, all is well. But this is not rational thinking for several reasons. The asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs and started a major mass extinction is the only event having to do with outer space that we can trace with any certainty. And new science indicates that the asteroid impact itself wasn't what killed the dinosaurs. It was the global warming that followed it. New science has discovered a common theme in all of the extinctions in the past, and it's woven right into the global fabric of today as yet another mass extinction threatens our planet. That global consistent thread is global warming. We have had 6 extinctions in the billion-year history of life on our planet. Each sharp spike in the chart below indicates one of these mass extinctions. And there's a chart on the page. Occurring about 450 million years ago, the Ordovician/Silurian mass extinction devastated marine life, which at the time dominated the planet. In a series of 2 extinctions, 60% and 70% of all life on the planet was taken, respectively. Then, fewer than 100 million years later, the planet was rocked again. The Denovian period was capped off by a 20 million year death march. It killed off 70% of life on Earth. This included many coral reefs, which didn't return for another 100 million years. We know of the KT extinction, the Cretaceous-Tertiary extinction, which occurred 65 million years ago, ending the reign of the dinosaurs. There was also an extinction event 200 million years ago, known as the Triassic-Jurassic mass extinction. But none of these extinctions explains the huge spike shown in the center of the previous chart. That one happened 250 million years ago and was the worst mass extinction of species event in the history of our planet. It was the extinction of all extinctions, referred to as the Great Dying. The Permian mass extinction took out at least 95% of all life on the planet in fewer than 100,000 years, an instant in geological time. Professor Paul Wignall of the University of Leeds, and an expert on mass extinctions, told me that the Permian was the greatest crisis that life on Earth has ever suffered. Only in the past 2 decades has the cause of the Permian extinction been understood.
It was speculated that an asteroid impact may have been the trigger, but more recent research by Professor Wignall, geologists, and other scientists around the world have revealed the true trigger came from deep within the Earth. The permanent mass extinction was initiated by a colossal flow of lava in an area of what is now Siberia. That was the trigger, but not the killer. The killer was under the water and under the ice, where trillions of tons of greenhouse gases, largely derived from carbon, and frozen in the form of crystalline methane, lay in wait. Thus, global warming is the force behind the death of nearly everything on the planet during the Permian mass extinction. That point is well illustrated. You can again see the spikes of mass extinctions measured by the increase in global temperatures, with the largest spike representing the Permian mass extinction. Wignall told me, there have been a lot of disasters and crises in the geological past. It's interesting to study them because they may have a comparison to today. He added, I think it is certainly extremely significant that a lot of the main crises of the past are associated with global warming, with obvious implications for the present day. The sixth mass extinction may even rival the speed and intensity of the Great Permian mass extinction, but the sixth is not represented on either of the two previous charts. That's because it's the one happening today, right now, all around us. And then we go on to document how the burning of fossil fuels is throwing an amount of carbon into the atmosphere, greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, that's relatively similar to what happened with that giant volcanic eruption in Siberia 250 million years ago with the Permian mass extinction, and how it could be leading to a major extinction event. The book is The Last Hours of Humanity, Warming the World to Extinction.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A number of news stories that I wanted to share with you today, some of the stuff that's going on in the world that we will get to in just a moment. But first, Rick Wartzman is on the line with us. He is the author of a brilliant new book, The End of Loyalty, The Rise and Fall of Good Jobs in America. He's the director of the K.H. Moon Center for a Functioning Society at the Drucker Institute, Claremont Graduate University. He's a contributor to Fortune magazine. You can tweet him at rwartzman, W-A-R-T-Z-M-A-N, and the website is drucker.institute. Rick, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Tell us the premise of your book, The End of Loyalty.
So the premise is this is a narrative history, and it looks at this long arc over about 70, 75 years from the end of World War II until today. And it looks at what's happened to what I describe as the social contract between employer and employee in America. And I define that as job security, pay, pensions, retirement security, and health care benefits. And through the lens of four big companies, General Motors, General Electric, Coca-Cola, and Kodak, I trace the rise of the social contract and then its unraveling.
So this was a contract that was not codified at law beyond, the Wagner Act and things like, that facilitated it essentially. The National Labor Relations Act that allowed for unionization and protection of unionization. But beyond that, this was largely something that was put together as a deal between business and workers in the years immediately, particularly in the years immediately following World War II. Was that because of the concern that soldiers coming back home would not find employment and that could lead to civil unrest? Or was that because the employers were trying to make that transition back from a wartime economy? The nylon manufacturers had been shifted to making parachutes, and the car manufacturers were making tanks and airplanes. Was it what was driving those decisions?
So there was a real mix of impulses. Certainly, one thing that you said was absolutely motivating the leaders of the four companies that I talked about, and others who were together actually instrumental in the founding of an organization called the Committee for Economic Development. And this is where my book begins in late 1942 with the founding of the CED. It's still around, by the way, now part of the Conference Board, but it was a leading business organization of its time. And yes, a real mix of things going on. One was, as you say, there was fear that if there weren't good jobs provided to the tens of millions of servicemen returning home, that America might face another depression, perhaps even worse than what had unfolded in the 1930s. And there was a fear that I think not only would social unrest perhaps result from that, but that socialism or even communism might take root on American soil. There's a great quote from Harrison Jones, who was the chairman of Coca-Cola at that time, and he warned that a great unemployment wave becomes a seedbed for isms. So he was worried about the isms. That's where other...
As in fascism, communism, socialism, isms?
Yes, exactly. And there were other things going on as well. So again, part of it was fear of that. Part of it was there was definitely a notion among business leaders at that time that if you didn't put enough wages in people's pockets, that they wouldn't have enough to buy with. And if we were going to fuel this great consumer culture of ours and consumer economy, that we needed to make sure that wages were sufficient to do that. And it's interesting. I mean, you now hear folks like Larry Summers, the former Treasury Secretary, warn that with wages stagnant for so long, that we may be in this period of secular stagnation. There just isn't enough dough to keep the economy humming that people have in their pockets. So that was something that they wanted to do as well. The way that the president of General Electric, Charlie Wilson, put it at that time, he said, "How are they going to buy my refrigerators if I don't give them enough wages to do it with?"
Right, which is kind of paraphrasing Henry Ford's arguments in the Dodge v. Ford Michigan Supreme Court case in the 30s.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and Ford, for many faults, definitely got it. He raised his workers' wages overnight from $1 a day to $5 a day, and lo and behold, they could buy cars. They could buy Fords.
Yep.
So that was part of what was going on. The last factor I'd mention, and there are others, but the other thing that was really significant to me that jumped out in my research is in this period, beginning in the kind of mid to late 40s, this generation had just come through the Great Depression and World War II together. And there was undoubtedly more of a we culture in America then, kind of we're all in this together, much more than an I culture. And I think that also had a lot to do with the way that corporations saw workers and wanted to treat workers. There was definitely a we ethic more than an I ethic, and that was reflected in corporate culture. Corporate culture reflected these larger societal norms.
It seems to me that the most consequential change was in the 80s, the changes in compensation rules for senior executives, that prior to basically the Reagan administration, CEOs saw their roles as being responsive to a variety of constituencies. You and I talked about this last night on television. To the company itself, the institution, most of them had worked their way up in the company. The average in 1980, the average time a CEO had been in a company was over 30 years. They felt an obligation to their employees. They felt an obligation to the communities in which their factories were operating. They felt an obligation to their customers to produce a good product for them. And finally, an obligation to their stockholders. And by changing their compensation rules so that they could be paid with stock options, all that went out the window, and everything just increased the value of the stock, to the point that over the last couple of years, we've seen, like the banks, for example. I just saw this report in the Financial Times last week that the big banks in the United States in the previous calendar year, nearly 100% of their earnings went into share buybacks and dividends rather than into loaning money to people, which is what banks are supposed to be doing. And so, therefore, they've just become, extractive machines in our economy, and it's not unique to banks. You want to riff on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a very important theme of the book, and you've hit right on it. But the book explores through the lens of these four corporate giants, these iconic companies, all kinds of forces that have caused the social compact to erode. So, through their lens, you can see the effects of automation and technology play out and what that has meant for workers. You can see the effects of globalization and competition from low-wage countries. You can see massive shift from a blue-collar culture where you could, with very little education, less than a high school education in many cases, walk into a factory, and though it was really backbreaking, tough work, you could find a path to the middle class. Those jobs really don't exist anymore. And as we've shifted into a knowledge age. And so the book talks about all of those big forces. But the gasoline on that fire is exactly what you're saying, is that companies have shifted from a stakeholder mindset, a very explicit stakeholder orientation. We're going to take care of and balance the interests of all these different constituencies, as you say. Shareholders, yes, but also workers, communities, customers. Even they would, in the old days, brag about how much they paid in taxes to fill government coffers. Now they, tout how much they avoid taxes, or at least to their shareholders they do, and offshore money so that it raises profit. So all of that has changed into this maximizing shareholder value model. And as you note, CEO pay has now been linked through the issuance of stock and stock options. So it is in their interest to try and goose up the share price, often in the short term. And when you do that, employees suddenly don't look like assets you invest in. They look like an avoidable expense.
Right. And this is insanely destructive. Back in 2010, I published a book titled Rebooting the American Dream. Bernie Sanders actually wrote a cover letter and delivered it to all 99 senators. And there was a chapter in there explicitly calling for the repeal of this, changing our tax code so that executives could no longer be compensated with stock and stock options. I haven't been following the movement to do that. It's kind of an obscure thing. Most people get lost just in the conversation of it. But do you know if there's any movement in that direction? I know Bernie continues to talk about it, but I've not heard anybody else talking about this.
Not much. I mean, there are some academics, Lynn Stout at Cornell, who wrote a great book a few years ago called The Shareholder Value Myth,
right.
Which really pokes at and explodes this notion, which you still hear from executives and is still taught in business schools, that there is a quote-unquote fiduciary duty
right.
for executives to maximize shareholder value, which is just not true. She's a legal scholar, and the Aspen Institute's done great work on this. It's not true. And they and some others have called for the kinds of reforms that you're talking about, Roger Martin at the University of Toronto. But again, I don't know of much, if any, action actually in Congress, and it's hard to imagine with its current makeup that, how we'd even begin to move in that direction.
Yeah, it's remarkable. We have lost so much. We have such a ways to go just to get our country back functioning. Rick Wartzman, the new book, it's a brilliant new book, The End of Loyalty, The Rise and Fall of Good Jobs in America, Drucker.Institute. You can tweet Rick at rwartzman, W-A-R-T-Z-M-A-N. Rick, thanks so much for being with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Great talking with you, and thanks for writing a brilliant book. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. Welcome back. Helen in Portland, Oregon, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, Helen, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Well, it's about the eclipse. Well, number one, I think that it's no accident that Trump is president, because he reflects so much of us in the United States. And Trump was born on an eclipse, and lots
Wait a minute.
of things.
Seriously?
Yes.
A total eclipse?
Well, I don't know if it's total, but he was born on an eclipse, and every time an eclipse comes, something happens to him, a divorce, or his father dies, and then his mother died. And actually, he used to have spiritual leaders on sometimes, and I think it would be a good idea to have one of your friends on talking about the eclipse. Around the eclipse, Kennedy got shot, Roosevelt died, Diana died, and this will be a strong presence for Trump and also Pence. And even though people, you know, I mean, we live in Oregon and used to be here, we are really feeling the whole thing strongly. I mean, they're going to have, people are going to be renting 20,000 cars from the airport. People are coming from all over the world. You know, places at the beach are costing $1,000. But really, it's a big influence on all of us. And it also will affect Charles in England and you know, different leaders, powerful, strong people. So it's something to watch. And like I say, you might want to have somebody on.
That's interesting. I mean, if all those things you said are the case, and I have no reason to doubt you, I just have no, you know, backup for it. You know, and it might just be a coincidence too. I mean, you know, we tend to fit things into our perceptual biases. But if those things are the case, that's particularly Trump being born on an eclipse, getting divorced on an eclipse, getting married on an eclipse. You know, he was. Oh, Troy just said he just verified this, that Trump was born on a total eclipse. That's amazing. Yeah, and Sue just posted this. Astrologers warn solar eclipse could spell disaster. Oh man. Well, I don't know. I don't know what to make of it, Helen. But
just to feel, to be aware, and just to watch how things are. I mean, we have definitely gone into the twilight zone in a way. I mean, but also in order to have things become better, we have to go into a very dark place before we get there.
Yeah, it certainly seems that that's the case. And I mean, there's a lot of cliches and metaphors for that. You know, it's always darkest before the dawn. The pains are worse just before childbirth, you know, et cetera, that all tend to lead us towards something better. You know, the dawn comes, the baby's born. But what if it's the war starts? I mean, that's not a better thing. And you know, Donald Trump being born on an eclipse, and a total eclipse, and now we've got an eclipse coming. That's pretty spooky stuff. I had no idea. Helen, thank you for the call. And wow, you know. What do we do with that? Let me scratch my head on that one for a day or so. We'll be back right after this one.
Hi, I'm Valerie with Free Speech TV. We're proud to provide you with independent, unfiltered news and documentaries. And as our valued viewer, you can help us continue bringing Free Speech TV well into the future. Join our Pearly Gate Rebels, our planned giving program. Your gift of any size will help ensure democracy endures through an informed citizenry. You can donate property, money, or assets. It's easy. My spouse and I are proud Pearly Gate Rebels. We're doing our part to ensure that Free Speech TV will be here to deliver thought-provoking news and information well into the future. Join us. Call 877-378-8669 or email me at valerie@freespeech.org. Rebel against media owned by billionaires and become one of our Pearly Gate Rebels today.
Welcome back. So there were a few news stories I wanted to just bounce off you here before the day expires totally. The National Rifle Association, I've been scratching my head on this one. Philando Castile, who was shot to death by a police officer as he was reaching for his identification to show the officer that he had a gun on him and he had a permit for it. So here is a man who you would think the NRA would love, right? They would love him. He's a legal gun owner with a legal permit to carry and a concealed weapon legally. And he informs the officer of that. And as he's reaching for his wallet, which the officer has asked for, the officer shoots him. And I've been wondering, why is the NRA not all over this? Why are they not, all upset? Why didn't, the officer has been charged with second-degree manslaughter. Clearly there is a crime here, or at least the prosecutor thinks there's a crime here. Why is it that the officer, or why is it that the NRA has not come out and condemned the police department for shooting a man who had a legal carry permit and a legal weapon? Well, the NRA has finally broken their silence and said, well, there was some THC in his bloodstream. At some point in the last month, he had smoked some pot. I think that we know the real reason. And it has to do with Philando Castile's race. This is really sad. Okay, meanwhile, this from Economic Times, the India Times, indiatimes.com. It's actually a Reuters story, so I guess it's from everywhere in the world. Reuters, this is today, just posted, a few hours ago. China's foreign ministry said that a U.S. Navy destroyer, this would be the John S. McCain, USS John McCain, a U.S. Navy destroyer that carried out a freedom of navigation operation on Thursday, today, in the South China Sea. Today would have been middle of the night on the other side of the international date line, had violated international and Chinese law and seriously harmed Beijing's sovereignty and security. U.S. officials earlier told Reuters the USS John McCain had traveled close to Mischief Reef in the Spratly Islands, among a string of islets, reefs, and shoals, an area where China has territorial disputes with its neighbors. This is what the ministry said, quote, now this is the country that we're going to need as an ally if we're going to take on North Korea. This is what they had to say. The U.S. destroyer's actions have violated Chinese and international laws, as well as severely harmed China's sovereignty and security. China is very displeased with this and will bring the issue up with the U.S. side. Trump is poking the bear, the dragon, whatever. It's amazing. Meanwhile, more than half of all Republicans say that if Donald Trump says we need to postpone the 2020 elections, no problem. No problem. And why? Because of all those Mexicans in California who voted illegally. Not. I mean, we actually know that you're more likely to die from a television falling on your head, literally. You're more likely to die being struck by lightning than you are to vote illegally. It pretty much doesn't happen. I mean, who wants to walk into a government office and commit a felony? Nobody. Only an idiot, right? And in fact, most of the cases of so-called voter fraud have been Republicans. It's, the ones that have been busted. But somehow, Fox and right-wing hate radio have sold this, and Trump have sold this story to the Republican rubes. And they're ready to give up on our democracy. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls.
With the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from Healing ADD. Richard Bandler, the founder of Neuro-Linguistic Programming, NLP, wrote the foreword for this book. And it's basically a book on NLP as applied to people with ADHD. But it's actually a pretty good book on NLP, which is actually how I originally wrote it. So we're on chapter 8 on page 80, Reconstructing the Past. Different types of memories, regardless of how anchored in reality or fantasy they may be, are stored in our brains in different ways. These forms of storage involve the 5 sensory modalities: sight, smell, hearing, taste, and feeling, and the subtle gradations of each sense, such as color, brightness, or contrast for the visual modality, for example. These gradations are referred to as submodalities. This is true for both adults and children.
One of the ways our brain organizes information is according to the way it's stored. Our senses pick up something in the outside world. Say we see an insect fly by. That's an objective thing that we've seen. However, before that image makes its way to our conscious brain, it's processed by other parts of the mind and tweaked and tuned. If it's a bug that frightens us, perhaps a wasp, then the mind sees it as a bigger object and in sharper contrast than it really is. Other objects in the picture, the background, buildings, grass, whatever, become more distant, dull, perhaps even less colorful. The mind may increase the volume of the sound associated with the wasp and also attach a feeling to the image, probably a variation on what we might interpret as fear or panic, a feeling felt perhaps in the pit of the stomach or the trembling of the hands. So here's a quick list of some of the submodalities that we commonly use to experience reality and store memory. In the visual field, color or black and white. So this is how do you remember things visually? Color or black and white, contrast, size, bordered or not, moving or still, brightness, graininess, distance from us, associated or disassociated. In other words, do we see the scene as we saw it or do we see ourselves in it? Focus, detail, texture, perspective, dimensionality, is it flat or 3D? Proportion, that's the visual field. In auditory, loudness, tonality, distance, pitch, melody, inflection, location, tempo, duration. Gustatory, salty, sweet, spicy, musty, bitter, familiar, delicate. Olfactory, strong, faint, intermittent, familiar, unique, musty, moist, damp, mildewy. Kinesthetic, the feeling. Hard, soft, cool, warm, sharp, electric, intensity, duration, speed, location. Now here's the amazing part. If you know what modalities and submodalities your mind uses to store a particular type of memory, happy, sad, hopeful, afraid, neutral, whatever kind of memory it is, then you can adjust the memories you have of the past to change their emotional feel. For example, think of something, a memory of something that you did in the recent past, such as brushing your teeth last night. Mentally list the qualities of the submodalities. Your list might look something like mine. I see a still picture in black and white without a lot of contrast or detail. Associated, I see the mirror in the sink, but not myself. No border, 3D, about 2 feet square, about 20 feet away from me. I can hear the sound of the water running and taste the mint of the toothpaste. If I concentrate on it, I can remember, or imagine remembering, the feeling of the toothpaste on my toothbrush on my gum and the smell of the toothpaste. The feelings I associate with the memory are pretty neutral. Boredom might be the best way to describe it. It's something I do every night. Now imagine a control panel just below the image, or wherever you'd like it to be, with levers and dials that you can use to change the various submodalities. Reach out and change a few of the submodalities and see how things change. When I move the picture from black and white to color, I suddenly feel curious and interested in the process of brushing my teeth. It seems fascinating. If I turn up the volume, I become uneasy. As I increase the mint taste, I feel more awake. Nobody knows why this works the way it does. One theory is that the brain stores information holographically rather than digitally, so that the brain sees its own storage capacity as a three-dimensional space. Because we experience the world through our senses, it makes sense that we could organize the mechanism for storing the information about our experience of the world along sensory lines as well. When something is put into a particular space, it acquires the sensory nature of that space, since sensory signals are how we experience the world. So when a memory is put into the boring category in our brain, it becomes, in my case, everybody's different, but it becomes, for me, black and white still pictures and all the other submodalities I described before. When the submodalities are adjusted and the pictures are turned into a color movie, it doesn't just change the memory. It actually causes us to interconnect with or slide to a different storage place, a physical different storage space in my holographic brain. There's also a concept known as a critical submodality. That's the submodality which has the ability to shift others, probably the primary hook into the place in the brain hologram where the memory is stored. As you're going through the various submodalities, changing each one a bit in one way or another, turning up or down the brightness, the volume, you'll notice that there's generally one particular one. It could be anything from volume to contrast to smell to brightness, anything. It causes the entire picture to change and creates a sudden shift in the feelings associated with that memory. That submodality shift is the critical submodality. And once you know what your critical submodalities are, you can do this process much quicker. One of the most common and most powerful critical submodalities is location. When you move a picture from where it is, for example, in front and to the right about 4 feet away to some other place, for example, in front and slightly over your eyes, only a foot away, it often changes dramatically its impact. So it goes from there to talk about how to take memories that bother you or that haunt you even and transform them into things that are simply just who cares memories. The book is Healing ADD, Simple Exercises That Will Change Your Daily Life. Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. This Dana Milbank's piece, the Trump Cleanup Patrol, just had its biggest job yet. It's brilliant. There's another piece that in the Washington Post that I would refer you to, Greg Sargent's column, the plumb line this morning, about, can John Kelly fix Donald Trump? Right. And then, fascinating piece over at Huffington Post Politics. Here's what the title is. It's by Dana Leibelson. And the headline is, here's what happens after Trump's FCC got to oversee inmates' phone service. It starts out with the story of Mandy Martin. She's a 40-year-old woman living in Louisiana. She talks to her husband on the phone for about an hour every day, but he's in prison. So those phone calls cost about $500 a month because they've privatized the phone services, and because the companies are now running monopolies, they can charge anything they damn well please. And because it's prisoners, there's not a big constituency of outraged people, and this is terrible. This is just terrible. Anyhow, pick up your calls here. Ivory in Oroville, California. Hey, Ivory, what's on your mind?
Hey, I was just wanting to talk about the Israel Anti-Boycott Act. It's a bill, it has a lot of support. It has a lot of bipartisan support.
Or at least it had before it was widely aired that it would cause, if you were to speak out in favor of boycotting Israel, that you could go to prison for 20 years. I think that kind of took the bloom off the rose.
Yeah, and it was actually written and co-sponsored by a Democrat, and I was wondering why is it that there's a certain orthodoxy within the Democratic and Republican Party that Israel, we have to stand by Israel no matter what, no matter if they're. I call Israel a apartheid theocracy, because if you're not Jewish, you get less rights. I mean, why are we supporting a country that did some of the same things we did in our past with African Americans and stuff like that? I mean, it's essentially...
I don't think you can compare what's going on in Israel to American slavery, but it is, what's going on in Gaza is pretty awful, and what's going on in the West Bank is pretty awful. And, I'm with progressives in Israel. I'm with J Street. There's a bunch of, in Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper that of the left, who want there to be a two-state solution, give the Palestinians a Palestine, let the Israelis live in peace. I am pro-Israel and horrified by what's been going on over the last couple of decades under these right-wing governments. And but the BDS or the anti-BDS bill. I don't think that there's a chance in hell that thing is going to pass, given what is now known about it. So, Ivory, I think it's a dead topic. Tom in Chicago. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today?
Hey, hi, Tom. Without the H, me this time. Anyway, I wanted to share something I heard on the Chicago WCPT station yesterday, and I was doing other work. I was distracted, but what I was hearing was it seemed to be comparative sound clips with Trump's fire and fury speech the other day, with that repeated phrase that he has been using, like the world has never seen before. But they were intercutting it with clips of Harry Truman speaking upon the occasion of the bombing of Hiroshima and the demand for Japanese surrender. And if they didn't, there would be... And I was hearing fire, and in Harry Truman's vintage recording, fire and fury, like the world is now yada, yada, yada. And
it's a quote from Isaiah. The difference, and it's a really important difference, is that Harry Truman had just dropped a nuclear bomb on Japan and was asking the Japanese to surrender in this war and telling them, we are going to drop a second bomb on you if you don't surrender. And they ignored his warning, and he dropped a second bomb on them. That's how you do it. If you're going to threaten something, you follow through with it. Donald Trump has no intention, to the best of my knowledge, and he'd be certifiable if he did, and I think if he tried, probably the Joint Chiefs would do something, would restrain him. He had no intention of nuking North Korea. This was an empty threat. The North Koreans know it. They came out and called him senile and demented. They said that we're gonna do our next missile exercise is going to be off the coast of Guam. Just to thumb our nose or to thumb their nose at the United States.
But the point I wanted to make was about this discussion about the fact that A, people were saying that it had been scripted and advised, or B, that he had improvised it at the table there. Something had gotten into his mind, and if you watch him, there's a hesitation as he's looking like he's quote unquote improvising, but he's probably trying to remember so that it is the same quote as the Democratic president, regardless of the elevation or the scale of the threat that you just specifically and very nicely described. That issue is separate. I'm looking about the fact that in this process of debunking all this stuff that comes out when Trump opens his mouth, that it wasn't original. I mean, it wasn't improvised by him.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tom. And in fact, in the article in the Washington Post that as I recall, maybe it was the Times, that first said that this was an improvised comment, that article also noted that he and others around him had used a phrase like that, or maybe even that identical phrase, in private meetings prior to this public use of that phrase. So, I don't think that Trump is frankly smart enough to remember what Harry Truman said, or biblically informed enough to know what was in Isaiah. I totally believe that this was either a student of history or a student of some right-wing Christian who laid it on him. That phrase, and he liked it. It stuck, and he just decided to use it in public, which he never should have done. I mean, it's like I said, you don't make threats unless you intend to follow through on them. Tom, thanks for your call. I think you're onto something. Girish in San Jose. Am I saying your name right?
Yes.
Hey, what's on your mind today?
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I'm a big fan. I'm a first-time caller.
Thank you.
And I have been in the U.S. since 1989. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to understand, Tom, I wanted your help to understand what the status was before we had the Affordable Care Act. Was there any act that governed the medical insurance environment?
Yeah, it was pretty much all done at the state level. Every state has insurance laws. Every state, I believe every state, it's conceivable that there's a state or two that doesn't, but I believe that every state has a state insurance commissioner, and that insurance commissioner oversees somewhat broad laws, typically from state to state, that require that insurance companies basically not rip us off. And so you have different standards in different states. I remember when Louise and I moved to Vermont back in 1989 or 1999, excuse me, 98, I guess it was. For the first time in over 20 years of having insurance with Geico, I got in an accident and they dumped my insurance. And my brother-in-law then moved to the state, a few months later. He had Geico and he had something, I think it was a traffic ticket or something. He dumped his insurance. So I called the state insurance commissioner. I said, what's the deal here? And they said, well, we've got, tighter restrictions. We've got, the insurance companies have to, operate under tighter rules here in Vermont than they do in other states. And so this company is one of several companies that just doesn't like doing business in this state. So given any opportunity, they'll drop your policy. That was just car insurance. But the same thing is true of health insurance, that the health insurance policies are overseen by the state insurance commissioners. And that's where conservatives are saying, oh, well, if you could just sell insurance across state lines. What they're talking about is doing away with the ability of states to protect their own citizens through their insurance commissioners. And something that, by the way, was done during, as I recall, the Nixon administration. I could be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure it was in the 70s, the early 70s, where they changed the banking laws so that instead of credit card companies having to conform with 50 different individual laws, because there are bank commissioners in every state as well. Instead of having the credit card companies have to conform with 50 different laws and be answerable to 50 different states, they said, whatever state you want, you can pick. And so they all moved to either North or South Dakota. I'd have to look on a credit card and see. It doesn't even say anymore, but they used to. It's one of the Dakotas, which has the lowest common denominator laws, the most easy for the companies, tough for the victims laws in the United States. And all the credit cards now are issued out of one of the Dakotas for that reason. They want to do the same thing with health insurance, which would be, not a good thing for us. But did I answer your question, Girish?
So basically what you're saying is that the Affordable Care Act was the first federal law in this arena, right?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, the first major regulation of insurance. Now, this is a question for Wendell Potter. He's a real scholar on this stuff. I am not, but I believe that to be the case.
Okay, so I think that what the Democrats need to say again and again is that, look, we're trying to make things easier, and we always said that we can make it better. But why are these guys so intent on repealing the first thing that came to provide relief to millions of Americans?
Well, in my opinion, they're so intent to repeal it for two reasons. Number one, you had this whole Tea Party movement funded by libertarian billionaires who hate the idea of government providing services to working people. I mean, it's just an anathema to them. They consider it socialism. And so, a lot of half-truths got peddled about the Affordable Care Act, death panels, and it's going to destroy the country, and job-killing insurance, Obamacare, blah-de-blah-de-blah. And those myths got promulgated on right-wing hate radio and on Fox News, and so a large part of the Republican base actually believes them, number one. And number two, to politically exploit that for 7 years, Republicans said, oh, we've got to do away with this thing because it's going to destroy America, when in fact it's actually helping America. And they can't admit that now. And so that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is, oh, my God, this was a law that was put into place by our first black president. And it sure looks to me like the Republican Party and Donald Trump, and we've had several people from his inner circle say he's obsessed with Obama. It sure looks to me like they're just trying to destroy any remnant of an Obama legacy so that history will not even remember our first black president. And I think that that's a political high crime or misdemeanor, in my opinion. Girish, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls, the news of the day, and my thoughts on all of the above right after. Welcome back. David in Los Angeles. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, y'all have put a lot on my mind today. And I called in for one reason, but listening to the program in the queue, I mean, your callers, yourself, just had my mind just whipping back and forth. But one of the things that I'm going to try to focus in on, you mentioned something about the Joint Chief of Staff will be able to put Trump in check.
I would hope. I don't know that there's a mechanism for it, although they could refuse an order from the commander in chief. To the best of my knowledge, it's never happened.
Right. Well, I would suggest to you the history of Bush Jr. They were not able to put him in check with his weapons of mass destruction deception.
Right.
But what really fascinated me was this thing with the eclipse. And the fascinating coincidence, as you were kind of...
yeah, and we verified Trump was actually born on a day that there was a total eclipse, and we've got another one coming up next week. It's like, whoa, cue the Twilight Zone music, right?
Yes, sir. But what's really fascinating, now I'm not a religious person, I'm spiritual. Soon as Trump was elected... I was having a discussion with a friend of mine about this guy having his hands on the nuclear code, right? Yeah. And he was like something like yourself, kind of thinking that we do have safeguards in place, and that, this could never be. But this bellicose language and this atmosphere to which he's creating, keeping in mind now, you do have a percentage of Americans who believe in some kind of doomsday scenario. And a lot of these evangelicals who are still Trump diehards.
Yep.
Now, spiritually, I mean, there is some, one of the Caesars says, all that's in the mud, let it hatch out, right? Okay. And the hatching out of all of this hypocrisy furthers the outrage with the oligarchs of Russia and overlooking the oligarchs in our state that you would touch it on. That was what I was originally going to call in on, because they have been totally, well, I won't say totally, but they have been extremely successful. Now, in your conversation with the guy about the conditions of the economy and the of the United States, I think his name was Rick. All of the isms that you mentioned, fascism, socialism, communism, the one you didn't mention was capitalism.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm suggesting to you that everything that Caesar said about that's in the mud that needs to hatch out, which I think I've shared with you before, that it is apropos that the head of Trump be on this oligarch manifestation of the outgrowth of all of these things that have been hatching in the mud that has really corrupted this democracy, right? And so I think perhaps this eclipse thing, we might not want to just so readily walk past.
Right.
There are telltale signs. You mentioned that of the prophets.
Yeah. David, we're out of time, but I'm taking very seriously everything you're saying. Thank you, David. Very well said. We'll be back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. While there was a press conference going on today, Donald Trump was talking or tweeting. Where'd this come from? Oh, he's right on TV. Yeah. President Donald Trump argued that his fire and fury comment. This Paige Lavender writing over on the politics page of Huffington Post. President Donald Trump argued his fire and fury comments directed at North Korea may not have been tough enough, according to the AP and Reuters. Trump said Thursday, according to the reporter from the Associated Press, quote, North Korea better get their act together or they're going to be in trouble like few nations have ever been in trouble. Wow. Don in Burbank, California. Hey, Don, what's on your mind?
Hi. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
All of this back and forth with North Korea is, I mean, as you're just mentioning, the rhetoric has gotten crazier and keeps getting crazier. But why we've been experimenting with intercept, rocketry, et cetera. Vandenberg has done some of this stuff out here recently. They've had some successful shots. If they fire a missile at Guam, why don't we just shoot it down?
It occurred to me, Don, that might be a great demonstration. Japan, by the way, has already threatened to shoot it down if it goes over their territories. The problem is that anti-ballistic missiles are not all that reliable. I mean, and you don't have that much notice. Even the THAAD system that they've deployed in South Korea, one of the reasons that the South Koreans were opposed to it was because it creates a false sense of safety, of security, particularly if there's more than one missile being fired by North Korea. So, I would support that. If the North Koreans are throwing a missile particularly into U.S. territorial water, then by all means blow it out of the sky if you can. But if you can't, or if you fail to, that's a huge propaganda victory for the North Koreans. It would be better to prevent the thing from happening in the first place, in my humble opinion. Don, thanks for the call. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Hey, I wanted to comment on something that's kind of been bothering me for a while, and that is McMaster, Kelly, and Mattis even being there in the first place.
Three generals?
Yeah, the three generals being in, occupying cabinet positions.
Right.
I mean, I've always been a firm believer there should be a wall of separation between politics and the military. Mattis, for one thing, they had to change the law to get him in there.
Yep.
And Donald Trump already showed bad judgment.
They didn't change the law. They voted for a waiver. But so get your point. Yeah.
Yeah, and Flynn, picking Flynn in the first place was very bad judgment, and I've known Mike Flynn for like 20 plus years. And, Kelly has been damaged, I think, from the loss of his son. And McMaster, I've really been looking into this debate with the right wing, the schizophrenic criticism of McMaster. And actually, McMaster is a guy that knows, he's very, very familiar with the Army regulation of money as a weapon system. And he realizes how expensive these military adventures, for lack of a better word, can be. I think that's at the real heart of the right wing's criticism of McMaster.
So you think it's a neoconservative critique, the people who are representing the defense industry?
Yeah, well, I'll make my point really quick. Chasing the Taliban into the federally administrated tribal area of Pakistan is going to be extremely expensive, extremely. Right. And McMaster knows that. And if you look at, money as a weapon system, I mean, that's what the regulation is called. All weapon systems eventually run out of munitions. And, we could run out of money on this folly, this military folly is what.
Well, we've already, at least $1 trillion of our national debt right now you can attribute to Afghanistan and Iraq. And it'll probably be another 3 or 4 trillion before those two occupations are finished. Go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry. My main point is, as much as I understand the good-heartedness of, well, maybe the Joint Chiefs will step in. Well, maybe Mattis will be a bulwark against Trump's inclinations. I appreciate the good-naturedness of it, but I just don't believe I think it's a fiction.
Yeah.
I don't think they're really going to stop anything. Yeah. And I just wanted to make a point of that.
I don't disagree with you, Dave. When I said that, I said, one can hope. I don't know of any mechanism for it. In fact, there's a great piece in either the Times or the Post yesterday about how our nuclear system is set up to happen rapidly with no checks and balances whatsoever, on the assumption that the president may need to make a decision within seconds or minutes at the most, 6 minutes or so. And maybe we should rethink that, given who's in the White House right now. And I'm thinking that maybe rethinking that would be a good idea. On the other hand, you want to have some sort of a system for rapid response. Do you think that if Trump gave an order to nuke North Korea, that they would do it?
Actually, Tom, you made a great point earlier. As long as it's not illegal, and these generals are very limited. I don't care if they're in political positions now or not. They're very limited in refusing a legal order.
Right. Yeah. Well, then the UCMJ would not back them up on that. Good points, Dave Hall. Thank you. Thank you very much for the call. And thanks for listening to SiriusXM. What a day. A lot going on. A lot, tomorrow, Anything Goes Friday, we'll be back. And, another day, another tweet, another threat, another bizarre. Anyhow, get out there, get active. Tag, you're it. Democracy needs you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.